Salutations, Legion of Doom. Welcome to Podcast of the Storm, where socially awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all around nerds convene, talk, and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the nerdy occultist, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Hello, folks. This time it was my bee. It wasn't Brainstormer this time. We had to move it because I didn't sleep I didn't really sleep well Saturday night, so I needed Sunday off. Because my brain was screaming, "Why the fuck are you still awake, you idiot?"
It's no biggie. It's going to be I don't want to say relatively chill one. It's just like we got one thing to cover because, like, as we said in our 120 video, we were going to cover this video on our 125th podcast.
But it was like 25 minutes, and that requires, honestly, its own dedicated response video.
Yeah. This is made by a YouTuber known as Melina Pendulum. Let me share here in a second.
But she is better known by her Mary Sue writer's moniker, Princess Weeks.
Yeah, and we've covered a few things of Princess Weeks from the Mary Sue. Here is the funniest thing about Princess Weeks, or Melina Pendulum, as she goes by here on YouTube. She is not. She is no Rachel Eastman, and we often find ourselves somewhat agreeing with her.
Yeah, when you've seen the true red femme approach to things, the just generic, almost Christina Hoff Sommers-esque, or maybe even like Liana Kersner-esque feminism is a lot less extreme. That being said, there's still things in here that I'm going to philosophy spurg, because apparently she also comes from a philosophy background, which might be why she doesn't make rookie philosophical mistakes all the time. But because I am also, or was also, a philosophy major, I can call you on things that you that might go unnoticed by other people. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'll voice my stuff when the superhero stuff comes up, because I'm not really a philosophy guy.
I think you'd be good. I think you'd be good at it if you tried to get into it. That being said, the way that they teach philosophy now is fucked.
Yeah, so, that's kind of why I don't want to learn it just from now. But also,
I mean,
it's never really been a thing that's really interested me as well.
I mean, there are plenty of places that you can independently study it on your own. I mean, that's why I ended up going into philosophy, quote unquote, academically, was because it was something that I always had a passion for, just inherently.
Yeah.
That's also what pissed me off about it, because they took something that was the light of my life, and they took all of the enjoyment out of it for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So yeah, Dalton's gonna cover the philosophy stuff. I'm gonna cover the superhero stuff as best I can.
and we'll probably meet somewhere in the middle like we usually do.
Yeah. Got nothing else to really say.
Without further ado, once more into the breach, I suppose.
Yeah. Right. Sorry, I forgot about saying the title of this. This is why the cynical superhero isn't that interesting. This is kind of an old video. This was uh, uploaded to YouTube on November 25th, 2020, and we had actually meant to cover this during our 100th podcast, but we couldn't, and we couldn't do it also with the 120th podcast. So again, we're just moving it here.
Yeah, Macintosh took precedence because on the crazy o-meter, he is far further up than
Melina Pendulum.
Melina. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. Shall we?
Yep. Once more into the breach.
Banana.
This video has been sponsored by the lovely members of my Patreon. Love you. There comes a time in every college student's intro to philosophy world where they have to decide if they are Team Hobbes or Team Rousseau. Thomas Hobbes was an English philosopher.
All right, 20 seconds.
Right. Okay.
Before you do the tangent, would you be willing to, for those who don't know, especially me as an audience, like the audience, who the two philosophers she had mentioned?
Okay. Thomas Hobbes was a member of the English Enlightenment. And what she's mostly going to be talking about here is Hobbes's theory of justice and how it relates to something that Hobbes referred to as the state of nature, quote unquote. Basically, Hobbes's supposition was that obviously everything has a nature, and that human nature was inherently animalistic and barbaric, and we needed society or civilization to make us better people. Whereas Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and she's going to make a joke out of his name, but I've done the same thing with other philosophers. I mean, I make the obvious joke about Michel Foucault, so I'm not going to begrudge her the joke. Rousseau's assumption / supposition / conjecture was essentially there is effectively no nature of humanity. He took off of another guy by the name of John Locke, who said that human beings enter the world as a blank slate or a tabula rasa, and that most of what we call humanity, and again this is back to Rousseau, is the result, or most of what we think of as human society is the result of what he called the social contract. That being said, I disagree with both of these individuals, and we will get into why probably in some kind of short order. But the main quibble that I was going to make, and it's a minor gripe, but you don't need to dichotomize yourself between Hobbes and Rousseau. You could dichotomize yourself between Hobbes and Locke, or like I do, I tend to favor more the Socratic and Platonic way of thinking in opposition to the Aristotelian way of thinking. I find it a little bit odd and perhaps even a little bit suspect that she jumps right to Hobbes v. Rousseau rather than Socrates versus Aristotle, which is where I would think the war of dueling philosophers tends to start happening. there's a lot of philosophers who predated Socrates and Plato, but for most, especially like she's saying here, for most intro to philosophy sort of courses, that doesn't. A lot of intro to philosophy courses, for whatever reason, hyper focus on the relationship between philosophy and religion, which isn't an invalid take, by the way. I just think it's a little bit counterproductive to hyper focus on that one specific thing first. But for most intro to philosophy courses that don't do that, the dichotomy you first experience is the dichotomy between Plato or Socrates and Aristotle. I say Plato or Socrates because the only reason we know anything about Socrates' teachings is because Plato wrote them down. So when you say Socrates or Plato, they're sort of usually used interchangeably to some extent or other. But yeah, that's my only gripe with this here, is that she jumped past the first 1,000 years or so of philosophy for some reason. Like she didn't, like not even just excluding Socrates and Aristotle, she also completely glanced over the Stoic perspective of people like Epicurus. And Stoicism was kind of a big deal in philosophy because it even impacted the emperors of Rome at one point. Like Marcus Aurelius was probably the poster boy for Plato's Philosopher King, if there ever was said to be a real life version. But that's me getting a little bit too much into shop talk. My main point is, why did you pick Hobbes and Rousseau instead of Plato or Socrates and Aristotle? Because that, if you ask me what the great fights in philosophy are, and you wanted to go back to the very beginning of philosophy, I'd start you off with the Socratic approach and then the Aristotelian approach. But that might just be me nitpicking. So, banana.
Okay. Banana.
And best known for the 1651 book Leviathan, which argues for a social contract and a rule by an absolute sovereign. Hobbes believed that strong authoritarian figures were needed in order to keep man from going apeshit.
And again, I disagree with both Hobbes and Rousseau on this point. I tend, if you put a gun to my head and made me choose between only Hobbes and Rousseau, and I couldn't do anything about it, I would lean more towards Hobbes because at least he does acknowledge that there is such a thing as human nature, as opposed to going, there is no human nature, everyone is just a blank slate to be written upon by life. And this is exactly why, if I was having this kind of conversation, my attempts at intro to philosophy would lean more towards the Socratic and Aristotelian directions, because they were more focused on figuring out what human nature or nature in general is. And I think that one of the downfalls of the English Enlightenment is they all just sort of the entire English Enlightenment seems to fall under the frame of, we don't know about human nature, we're never going to know about human nature, so let's just hyper focus on how society should be structured and how we should choose to live our lives, like socially and politically and stuff. The problem with that is, because any system you devise is going to need to have humans in it, barring transhumanism or aliens, you kind of need to know what human beings are like in general in order to correctly devise a civilization. And the main reason they did that was because Hobbes and Rousseau both lived a good 200 years before, or thereabouts, before Charles Darwin even came up with the theory of biological evolution, and it was a good 50 to 75 years after Darwin that people started to non-erroneously apply the principles of evolution to things like social structure or psychology. So I understand why Locke, for example, believed in a tabula rasa or blank slate, and I understand why Rousseau chalked every human tendency up to a social contract, but we have evolved in our understanding of these things since these people, and therefore we need to adjust our paradigms accordingly. Because Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau may not have known about evolutionary psychology or social psychology, but we do. John Locke may not have known about evolutionary psychology and social psychology, but we do. And the more understanding of a topic you get, the more you have to adjust your philosophies accordingly. This is one of the main reasons why it took me so long to be willing to identify as a classical liberal, because I could not, knowing what I know, which again, not a professional, didn't even finish my philosophy degree, but knowing what I know just from my own research about evolutionary psychology, social psychology, and all the rest, I cannot, in good conscience, believe in tabula rasa. Human nature is not a blank slate, and to call back to Rousseau, nor is it a social contract. The social contract, if there is said to be one, is an informal one, i.e. no one ever sat down and said, these are going to be the rules of our social contract. The social contract, if there is said to be one, essentially assembled itself out of the fact that human beings are a fundamentally social species and are psychologically programmed, for lack of a better word, to need each other and to engage in social environments. And this is the main problem I have with both Hobbes and Rousseau. They both kind of just assume that at one point human beings are just these uncontrolled things, and that civilization is necessary to rein them in, rather than civilization occurs because human beings already had those tendencies and is a natural reflection of humans' existence as a social species for millions upon millions of years. But again, they didn't know about evolution, let alone evolutionary psychology, so they're forgiven for that ignorance. But it annoys me when I see modern day, otherwise well-educated people looking at the Hobbesian and Rousseauan perspectives and not going, wait a minute, we now know more about human psychology and human evolution. Shouldn't we apply some of that information to our understanding of these things? Anyway, moving on. Let's hear her make her arguments, and I apologize if I have to repeat any of that again in response to her. I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, but I will try to structure it better if I have to repeat myself. Banana.
Essentially, to Hobbes, people were just gross, violent, and inherently fearful. Not the most flattering image of humanity, but having just survived the 2020 American presidential election, can't say that I don't get it. In comparison, Genevian philosopher
Okay, and again, I disagree with Hobbes on his assumption of the state of nature, as he put it. Meaning, he essentially believed that human beings were basic animals and that we needed civilization to basically parent us. And we needed things like the church and moral systems and the monarchy to be the mommy, incredulously wagging her finger at our antics.
Mr. Mortimer, yeah, I have my hand raised, man. Ask.
Yes, go.
That is kind of incredibly flawed on the fact that humanity rose from wild nature and created civilization from scratch.
Yeah, and this has always been my problem with these kind of pseudo philosophies, and I do call them pseudo philosophies because the fundamental thing about philosophy, and this is completely lost now in modern day philosophy, and it's part of what annoys me about modern day philosophy. In the old days, back in the golden age of philosophy, when it was mostly a two-horse race between Socrates and Aristotle for a long time, philosophy was about the study of logic and the study of ideas and the study of how those ideas fit together and what constituted a good philosophy. Unfortunately, around about this time is when people started foregoing the need to establish premises and to defend those premises using argumentation and just began postulating things. Now, it gets worse down the line with people like Jean-Paul Sartre, Kierkegaard, and Michel Foucault, who are the very essence of non-philosophers, in my opinion. And don't even get me started on Hegel, or we will be here all night. But I definitely think that people like Hobbes and Rousseau are sort of patient zero for this philosophy as conjecture rather than philosophy as the engineering of ideas and logic, which is what it was sort of originally. That being said, like I was saying with Hobbes, and like Brainstormer brought up, the problem with Hobbes' state of nature is that it is incredibly cynical and nihilistic towards humanity in general. And again, part of that is because neither of these philosophers had the necessary information to know more about how psychology works. This was before psychology as a science was even invented, by a good couple hundred years. Same thing with Charles Darwin. Again, this was long before the publication of On the Origin of Species, and it was way before Freud even proposed psychoanalysis, never mind Jung and his woo. But point being, the only approach that Hobbes seems to have toward what is human nature is human nature by itself is animalistic savagery, and then the only response people like Rousseau have to Hobbes is there is no human nature. You take a Locke's tabula rasa concept and you marry it to Rousseau's social contract concept, and you basically have the birth of the modern day approach that everything is a social construction, the social construction hypothesis. And I would disagree with all of you because human beings, like it or not, are animals, and our psychology, just like our biology, is subject to evolution. And fortunately for us, we are primates, which means we are social species. Now, granted, the qualities that we think of when we think of humanity are present in a lesser degree among our fellow primates, but I would venture that the differences between us and our monkey cousins is probably why they are all still swinging in trees and sitting in jungles and whatnot, and we are sitting here in the first world with, electronic communications and what have you. But even then, a lot of what Rousseau attributed to the social contract, or what Hobbes attributed to the civilizing aspect of humanity, or the civilizing aspect of civilization, is actually to be found more in our evolutionary psychology. Like, for example, and I've made this reference a bunch of times because it's one of my favorite go-to examples of this. If you give one monkey a biscuit for doing a task, and you give the other monkey a grape for doing that same task, and you let one of the monkeys see the other one, they both get mad because they have this onboard understanding of what fairness is. Now, again, it's more primitive, or I guess I should say less developed than the human understanding of these things, but that's because we're descended from beings similar to monkeys. We're the descendants of the monkeys that took the basic approaches of like fairness and that, and went, I wonder if we followed this to its logical conclusion, what would happen? And then boom, human civilization, basically. Anyway, sidebar over. Yeah, Hobbes is a twit for believing that the state of nature is barbarism, but given the choice between someone who at least acknowledges that there is such a thing as human nature and somebody who believes in tabula rasa, therefore social contract, I will go with the guy who at least proposes that there is such a thing as human nature. I would disagree with him on the particulars of what that human nature is. I think that it's been demonstrated we're a social species, but there. Moving on. Banana.
Only a minute in, and we've already been at this for about 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's gonna take this one's gonna take a while because oh boy. Banana.
Nah.
Jacques Rousseau, as I like to call him, believed that mankind was naturally free, wise, and good when not corrupted by the heartless intentions of civilization, not the Kingdom Hearts characters. He also thought women would torment men if we were taught to read.
Again, these people were morons because they didn't have enough data, but let's not
just
even with it.
Just for the sake of fact checking, that last part, is that actually like a real thing?
I mean, I don't recall anything in his writings about if women were taught to read, they would enslave men or something. But then again, it's been a long minute since I've dealt with Rousseau because he is probably my least favorite philosopher in this particular era. And the only people who I think are worse than him are people who took his ideas and ran with them. So yeah, like let's not even with this.
Also, to be fair, women kind of already had enslavement a long time ago. They just didn't know it. But that's a topic for another time.
Yeah, let's gingerly step over people like Charles Fourier, who Rousseau inspired, because if that ever gets brought up, we will be here forever. Banana.
I thought you had more to say.
I mean, I did, but I don't remember it now.
Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's good that you do that because otherwise I will go off on tangents within tangents.
Yeah, fair enough. Right, yeah.
Banana.
And I mean, that's my goal every day. But yeah, these are the two possible states of mankind, according to two dead old white men. Inherently bad, needing to be molded and sculpted by the government and laws, or inherently good and needing to shelter their ingenue baby protagonist hearts.
And again, I would disagree with both of you. This is an incredibly reductive dichotomy. And
sorry, no, please.
Yeah, and it completely forgoes the original questions of people like Socrates and Aristotle about the nature of things. And this is why I'm taking more issue with this than maybe I should, because she went all the way past the more individualistic approach to philosophy, the figuring out your own nature, i.e. know thyself and the nature of the world around you, and went right to the how do we construct civilization portion of philosophy. And again, not to be all conspiratorial and not to read too much into it, but if you're going to draw connections between philosophy and superheroes, I would recommend you focus more on stories about people's individual natures and their coming to things like power and self-knowledge.
Right. No, please finish your thought. I was going to give some examples of.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you can make an argument that they're philosophical, but I don't think that was the intent of the author. That was more a takeaway of the general consensus of it.
Yeah, and
for these stories I thought of in my mind as you brought up of superheroes and philosophy and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So first one is Alan Moore's The Killing Joke. Specifically with the kind of proposed ideology of the Joker, or his personal belief philosophy of the one bad day, which is proven wrong in that story.
Yeah. I think if you had to make a philosophical conjecture out of that, you definitely see a fall from grace in terms of the Joker. But you also see a very thin line between the state of being civilized, or the state of goodness, or whatever, and the state of falling into chaos and depravity. So honestly, you could probably interpret The Killing Joke in either lens. You could interpret it as Hobbesian because it took him only one bad day to become primitive and animalistic, or you could see it as Rousseauian because it did take one bad day in order to turn him from an upstanding member of society or something close to it to a creature of chaos and madness. I would say that neither Hobbes nor Rousseau's lens works particularly well, and this is part of the problem. There are many ways you can philosophically interpret superheroes, but why have you done this thing where you're applying macro philosophy to stories that, by our definition, about the potential of extraordinary individuals? And again, this is my problem. If you want to apply philosophy to superheroes, you should apply as much or as little philosophy as you can get away with within the parameters of the characters and storylines themselves. Which means don't take a story about extraordinary individuals and try to glean some sort of vast societal message out of it. Now, with the X-Men or someone like that, you can get away with the broader social commentary at least a little bit, because a lot of the X-Men stories do have that element of at least being subtextually about discrimination and people's social reactions to things. But you can't take Superman, the galvanized individual, if ever there was one. That's sort of what Superman means in this context, is galvanized individual, and turn him into a social commentary. And there's a very good reason why, which we will get into as she spins off an interpretation of this based on everything needing to be applicable to wider society.
Right. I was also going to bring up of a personal favorite character of mine, as I was thinking of other examples to list. And I've made no secret of this being one of my favorite characters. Like, I think I mentioned it like first ever podcast, Spawn.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is I believe this was never intentional for the creator writing this. It just kind of happened.
Mm-hmm.
As we all know, hopefully we all know, Spawn is a former U.S. I believe Marine
Turned mercenary, I believe, at one point. Yeah.
Yeah, turned mercenary who knowingly killed innocents for the service of the greater good of his country.
Mhm.
And he's resurrected via hell to be a hellspawn or spawn to enact war on Earth via heaven and hell.
Yeah, because we want to start the apocalypse is basically the long and the short of it.
Yeah. This is kind of my tangent, I guess, for this first part.
Mhm.
It is kind of a sidebar as well, but as we know, Al Simmons kind of refuses the call to action and refusing to be a soldier anymore, like a soldier who just takes orders, a good soldier, as to put it.
Mhm.
And it's a long and tough journey for that character. I'm not gonna lie, but just kind of he doesn't join heaven, the perceived inherently good guys, as it's shown in the comic that heaven is kind of just as, or possibly even more so, corrupt than hell. And therefore, and this is a line that I loved from the Witcher series, and you can roll your eyes and groan all you want. It's a good line from Geralt of Rivia, which is, "Evil is evil, lesser, greater. Given the choice, I prefer not to choose at all." And my interpretation of that, at least my personal interpretation of that line, is deciding which side you're on. Two major opposing forces, and you're kind of just stuck in the middle, forced to choose. You more just go your own path, making enemies of both, but sticking true to what you believe is right.
It's the essence of a false dichotomy, and this is exactly why I take issue with her dichotomizing Hobbes and Rousseau and leaving out so many other philosophical angles to this, and focusing primarily on the structuring of society more than the nature of the individual, which was the preoccupation of philosophy in the era previous to this, or at least the era more people in general philosophy courses will be familiar with previous to this, which was the prospect of Aristotle versus Plato and Socrates, which is what is human nature, and further to that, what is the best way to structure the self so that you can be the most efficacious, virtuous person you can be. Another preoccupation with or for Socrates and Aristotle and Plato was what is the good. Socrates and by extension Plato believed that.
Dalton.
Sorry.
No, I get it. I feel like you could save that for a later bit.
This is true.
Right. But for me, I do want to close off on Spawn, because it's also interesting. Is, again, he chooses neither side of heaven or hell, because again, they're both kind of equally fucked within the Spawn universe. At least.
Yeah, in different ways, but they are, again, false dichotomy.
Yeah. Granted, he doesn't do it out of a sense of absolute righteousness. Like, he doesn't do it for the greater good of humanity. But he does it.
In fact, that's most of the time how heaven fucks up, is because everything is the greater good.
We're not getting into that. We've discussed that many times on my personal feelings of the greater good bullshit. Anyway, in a way, Spawn mostly does it to protect his widowed wife, who thinks he's dead, Wanda, and the daughter of his, I want to say ex-wife, but they never divorced, obviously.
Because he died.
Yeah.
Horribly.
His widow.
Died.
his widow, who's Cyan. Fun fact: those characters are actually named after Todd McFarlane's actual wife and daughter, respectively.
I didn't know that, but well played, Mr. McFarlane.
Also, Al Simmons is based off a friend of his who was actually named Al Simmons.
Okay, and we're totally not going to become paranoid about that little canard there.
I don't know what you mean, but okay.
Considering that Malboja is an actual demon out of demonology,
It's Spawn's awesome. I guess that's what really we're boiling down to. Anyway, the real reason why he really does a lot of the good that he does is kind of to honor the memory of his love for his wife and stuff. Like the reason why he even goes after Billy Kincaid, the ice cream man, the serial killer pedophile. That's literally what he is.
yeah.
Is because he kidnaps his wife's daughter, and like he couldn't. And keep in mind, Al could never conceive with Wanda. Like I think he was infertile or something like that.
Oh no.
In life, probably more so now too, because he's dead.
Well, yeah, I can't imagine Hell's major priority was refertilizing that particular part of his anatomy. Although, if I were an evil bastard and I was going to create a Hellspawn, and I was like an archdemon or something, that would be probably my plan. Just make a really, really, really badass Hellspawn, so that he can get a lot of girls, and then repopulate the world with Hellspawn.
Right. That is why you see. This is why we're friends, because I can keep you from doing evil stuff like that. Anyway,
you realize, of course, if anything ever happens to you and you somehow die before me, I am releasing the Night Horde. I'm going full Dracula. Fuck this.
But anyway, so in a way, he's kind of choosing a more individualistic approach to being a protector of humanity. And in a way, you can make an argument that it is selfish, but he is being a hero, maybe not for the right reasons, like the quote unquote altruistic reasons, but he is being a hero for a good reason.
Mm-hmm. This is relevant because it completely forgoes the social commentary at angle or the the societal philosophy and is more focused and bound up within the individualistic approach and philosophy. I.e., what is Al Simmons' individual nature? How does his broader human nature affect his individual nature? And what choices does he make as a result of his natures, both broader human and
I think at
personal individual.
One time in the comics he became God, like with angelic wings, and basically he trapped Lucifer and God in another realm so they could basically duke it out without having any humans or anything caught in the crossfire anymore.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a good bit.
I really need to start collecting Spawn, the volumes of Spawn again.
I've got volume 1 somewhere. I think
I do too.
I don't think I've gotten the rest of them.
Yeah, I need to get that series. I've been watching the animated series on HBO Max. Fucking phenomenal. I love it.
Yeah, back when cartoon. Well, I guess cartoons are still good like that. It's just they're rarer now, and they're not on the main networks anymore because Netflix does most of the good ones.
Anyway, shall we?
Banana.
Banana.
From the rough city streets.
We gotta clean you up, child, and give you some on the job training.
And this is just the way that we view the average human being. Throw in a sprinkle of exceptionalism or superpowers, and you get narratives that have spent their entire premise on trying to prove one or the other. And
But see, this is the thing. This is exactly the thing, and this is the problem. You are starting from the premise that these philosophies, Hobbes v. Rousseau, apply as much on an individualistic level as they do on a societal level, and vice versa. The two are not interchangeable, and this is why I question your decision to, of all of the philosophical wars to hyper-focus on, and there have been many. Believe me, I know there have been many, many philosophers who hated each other's guts and hated each other's philosophies and spent their entire careers doing nothing basically but arguing back and forth with each other. This is an established thing, it's never going away, and it never has gone away. But the question I have for you here is, why did you pick the philosophers that, for all intents and purposes, ignore human nature almost entirely and hyper-focus on how civilization should be structured? Because there are plenty of philosophers, even in this era, who are more concerned with individual nature, or how their humanity at large impacts their individual nature. And to be fair, this is even before, again, Darwin or Freud showed up. So this was before evolution as a whole and psychology even existed effectively. So the fact that there were still philosophers willing to reduce things down to the individual and the individual's nature is impressive, if nothing else. I'm guessing you're going to make the argument that you're focusing on the societal angle because the beings in comics have inordinate superhuman levels of power. But that still doesn't solve this canard, because in Plato you have the concept of the world of the forms. Plato essentially believes, to some degree, and his followers, the Neoplatonists, believe to some degree, that every existing object or every existing idea was a fragment or a puzzle piece to a larger sort of overarching concept. Like every table is a piece of the Platonic ideal of tableness, or every chair is a fraction of the overall concept of chairness, and so on. So you could, if you were to go the Socrates versus Aristotle route or the Plato versus Aristotle route, make similar arguments to this, and I think those would probably hold more water because they're more focused on the question of what is human nature collectively, i.e., what do all humans have in common that make us human, and also what is the individual's individual nature like, particularly Aristotle, because his innovation in this discussion was to differentiate between Socrates or Plato's idea of the perfect arrangement of every single person and the individual idea of the good, which is to say that each individual thing had its own individual good to strive for. There wasn't a one-size-fits-all answer of the good. And this would actually be much more material to the discussion of superheroes, because superheroes are hyper-focused not on society necessarily, but on concepts like justice and altruism and the right ordering of both the self and the world, and so on. That's why there are so many different variants and versions of essentially the same figure, that figure being Superman, because he was Siegel and Schuster's idea of what the perfect man would be like, and other people had different approaches to what they thought that ideal man would be like, and some people believed that the concept of an ideal man at all was counterproductive, because man as a whole is individualistic, and therefore each individual person needs to decide what is good for themselves, and then you get more anti-heroes and people who walk more in the gray area from that, the idea that there is no perfect ideal and that we all just need to strive to something resembling our best, depending on what that is. That would actually be a interesting and productive discussion to have in this regard. Not saying it's the only discussion that can be had, and not saying it's the best one, because quite frankly, I'm still in the camp of you shouldn't project these philosophies onto this material. You should treat these beings, these characters, like fully rounded beings, and their worlds like fully realized worlds, and not project shit onto them, but instead discover what their individual nature is. Instead of asking how can I fit this world to either of these dichotomies, you should ask what is this world like on its own terms first, and then you can start extrapolating from that, if you want to start extrapolating at all. But that's more to do with my philosophy of art and aesthetics, of the thing in itself versus the thing as a means to an end. And we've already had that discussion many, many dozen times. So, Banana.
Banana.
Some way. Well, I'm going to dissect that issue with an anime and an R-rated superhero show, because that's just the kind of person that I am. During my quarantine, I've finally binge watched the popular shonen series, My Hero Academia, and I've collected multiple figurines to prove my alliance, plus a t-shirt, a bath mat.
Sorry, I have to pause it.
Yeah, Banana.
Banana.
And a throw pillow, and the Amazon series The Boys. Two very different shows, but both gave me a lot of really deep feelings about superheroes. Both are worlds where superheroes exist, and both of them deal with issues of morality, capitalism, and what it means to be a hero within those systems. But
see, this is going to be another problem I have with you.
Um,
I suspect. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, in terms of discussing again with the title, if that was more focused on, I suppose, why the cynical superhero isn't that interesting. The dichotomy between My Hero Academia and The Boys they're good examples of how to pit two against how to pit against one another.
Mm-hmm.
To me, at least.
Yeah, I'm not taking issue with her proposed examples.
Right.
I'm again mostly just.
It's the it's the thing she said after, isn't it?
Yeah, she's extrapolating a lot from very little here, and her extrapolations would be fine if she started from a decent premise, but again, I take issues with her choice to dichotomize this as Hobbes v. Rousseau rather than any other, duo of battling philosophers in history, and there's a fuck ton of them. You could do the same thing with Kant, and I forget who Kant had a massive issue with, because I know there was this thing about Kant's idea of phenomenology versus non-phenomenology, and a lot of people took issues with that. But I can't remember the other guy that always had arguments with Kant. But you could have easily done a Kant versus whoever the hell that other person who I forget his name is, and the idea of Kant's categorical imperative. But again, that would require you to focus not on the societal level necessarily, but on the individualistic level. Because as philosophically OCD as Socrates was, I think Kant might have had a beat just a little bit. Now, I disagree with Kant on some very important issues. I find that I don't agree with any one philosopher on everything, and I tend to keep what makes sense to me from a certain philosopher and forego the rest. But if we're really going to do this superheroes through a philosophical lens thing, let's actually bring in some people who did philosophy correctly. And again, it would be interesting to do it from a Socratic versus Aristotelian approach, and it also would have been interesting to do it from a Kantian versus, and I forget the other guy's name, approach. but you chose randomly to do it from a Hobbesian versus Rousseauian approach, and I'm still left scratching my head as to, of all the philosophers in all the history of philosophy, you had to walk into Hobbes and Rousseau instead of any of the other viable candidates. And I think it's because you view this through a particular framework and a particular lens, and you either find those other philosophers to be less valid, or you just can't see beyond the Hobbes versus Rousseau dichotomy. And as a philosophy major myself, I must remind you what we're constantly instructed to do with false dichotomies, namely defenestrate them, throw them out the fucking window. False dichotomies are unapplicable, and this is exactly why I hate this conjectural philosophy bullshit. If you're not subjecting your conjectures and your suppositions to logical rigor, then you have effectively not done philosophy correctly. This is more so me yelling at Kierkegaard and Sartre, but can equally be applied in this case to where you're taking Hobbes and Rousseau in this case.
Okay. You good for now?
Yeah, banana.
Banana.
Both deal with it in a very Hobbes versus Rousseau kind of way. Hence this video. Plus, since at this time, like 90% of our media seems to be related to comics or some sort of IP about comics and attached to the military or some big corporation or government.
I feel like you might have something to say, but
Please.
I do disagree with that statement there.
Mm-hmm.
Not every IP or comic or story relates to big corporation, military, whatever. Like, this is
you've conflated a lot of things there, my dear, and I think that's going to be the heart and core of the problem here.
I want to. Nope, it's generated. Do not like that. So it's not really. It's still not really covering much past videos. I guess I don't really have much to say, honestly.
I think you'll get there as we go in.
It's really. It's on like 3:10. So.
Okay, so yeah, we've got a ways yet.
3 minutes. We're already near an hour.
Yeah, philosophy takes a lot of spurging to get through correctly, unfortunately.
I kind of figured it's kind of also another reason why I don't think I'll ever major or minor in philosophy if I ever go to college.
Yeah, I'll have to recommend you some books for just like leisure reading, about philosophy, because I think you'd enjoy it. What?
Let's be completely honest. If you ever recommend me those books, I'm never going to read them.
Sigh.
I'm too much of a procrastinator. I have a book series I need to read, and that's 15 books long, and I barely started the first one. And plus the series the Dresden Files.
Yeah, the Dresden Files, which you still are behind on. But
I know.
And I think there might even be some videos back from when we first started recommending videos to each other.
I've been reading Same, man. That was the major one you've been recommending me.
Yes, I did badger him relentlessly until he read The Sandman.
Anyway, shall we?
Banana.
Or something like that. It is oddly relevant to explore exactly how our superhero content reflects the most cynical and optimistic parts of our entertainment, especially when it comes to the heroes who we end up loving, hating, and are super popular.
Oh,
See, I don't think Rousseau is. I don't think Hobbes and Rousseau are the most cynical or the most optimistic it's possible to go, and this is another issue I have with this particular problem, because Rousseau's supposition is we need society to protect us, because if we don't have it, then the world will just crash in on us, or other more vicious people will crash in on us and we'll be doomed. And to me, that's not any more uplifting or unnihilistic than Hobbes' supposition that human nature starts out as barbaric and needs to be molded by civilization. Again, I don't think I don't even think there is a molding going on here in regards to civilization. Human beings create civilization because we are social animals. Because, and again, this isn't a fault of Rousseau or Hobbes, but evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology exist. And the way evolutionary psychology works requires us as a social species to care about each other. And the only times when we don't effectively care about each other is when we are traumatized, beaten, or otherwise broken. That is the only way effectively to terminate the human natural tendency to be pro-social, with the possible exception of wrong-headed, counterproductive quasi-philosophy ideologies that believe in things like the greater good, or that human nature is inherently broken and needs to be saved from itself. Which is where I'm going to take a lot of issues with you here, because you are viewing this primarily through a sociopolitical lens. And not only do I find that to be just philosophically untenable on its base premises, but also where you take it as a result of viewing everything through a sociopolitical lens is many factors more insane than I think you are aware, my dear. Banana.
Oh my god! I just realized the image. Like, it's Homelander, but I never noticed this before. Dude's jerking off. Look at his face. I'm like, yeah, you see it? You see it now?
Well, I mean, that is in character with Homelander, so.
I hate the character, but I love the actor. Like, he's such an amazing actor. He plays the role perfectly.
Yeah, it's he's the kind of character that you love to hate, but the actor does a really good job.
I mean, that's kind of how you know it's a good actor.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
At least when they're playing a villain. If they're supposed to be playing a hero and you hate their guts, vis-a-vis Brie Larson, that's usually not a good thing.
Yep. Right. Show it.
Banana.
Originally a comic series from Garth Ennis and Derek Robinson, The Boys is an Amazon original series that follows a group of vigilantes called The Boys, who are attempting to take down a group of powerful heroes known as the Seven.
Okay, full disclosure, right? Okay. Like, for me and Dalton, Dalton, feel free to interject if you want. We, like, as the comic series, like, I've done research on the comic series. I'm not the biggest fan of The Boys. Like, of both the comic and the show, but mainly for the reason, well, the comic's just overtly just negative and shit and all that.
And also appears to hate itself and like its own genre.
Yeah. And the show itself, like, it's the same thing. It's like it's super cynical with like superheroes. That's kind of what I
Yeah,
turn me off.
if you if you put a gun to my head, I would say that the show is probably better than
Yeah,
the
no,
than the comic, oddly enough.
yeah, I will agree to that actually because I think it goes in ways you just don't expect, and it's really cool. But
But that being said, their entire premises annoy me most of the time. So
mhm. um, but so yeah, like we're not. I guess we're not really defending anything here.
no, we're not defending The Boys by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh my
And
god!
for the record, I would agree with the title of the video in that cynical superheroes aren't that interesting. I
I'm-
would in fact go further and say, in general, making superheroes cynical on purpose is counterproductive. Now, if you have an idea for a superhero character and that character happens to be cynical, that is one thing. But if you're trying to make some overarching existential point about cynicism using a character, then you can get fucked.
Right. Yeah, basically what you said. I felt like I had something. What's weird is it's kind of the same thing with like deconstruction, which is The Boys. To be fair, kinda.
Yeah. Well, cynicism and deconstruction happen a lot together because the basic premise is there is no intrinsic value to anything most people hold as intrinsically valuable,
What's
and
weird?
therefore to undermine it, the easiest way is usually some form of nihilism.
Right. There is a video by a YouTuber named Jay Ishira Benny.
Hmm.
Well, it was a live stream, and it was called "Why Deconstructed Superheroes Suck." I didn't watch it all the way through because it was like an hour long.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, my mind kind of goes with like this: is like again, a cynical superhero and a deconstructed hero can work if they're done properly. It's just again with the modern majority of writers of like superheroes and stuff.
They're trying to make either a socio-political or existential point about how the superhero stories they're writing somehow reflect real life, either morally or ethically or just existentially, and that in and of itself is. And I chalk it up in either direction to viewing art as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. And I bring this up because, as most people who are familiar with this show will know, I'm just as hard on people like Professor Geek, or I believe his name is The Fourth Age, or RJ from the channel called The Fourth Age, as I am the deconstructionalist, because I see a lot of times the backlash to deconstructionalism is an insistence on traditional Jungian archetypes. And you'll see people like Professor Geek trashing an otherwise great movie like Joker, for example, because it doesn't serve the correct archetypes in the correct way. And that kind of shit is, in my opinion, just as bad in its approach, in as an actual philosophical approach, not right now in terms of consequences, because the everything needs to be a Jungian archetype crowd is not as powerful as the everything needs to be deconstructed because nothing holds intrinsic value crowd. But I find the desire of a lot of people to switch from full deconstruction to full enforced Jungian archetypalism to be a bit of a false dichotomy in and of itself. My approach is treat the characters like people and treat the worlds like worlds, independent of whatever utility they might have to the world or the readers, and just make characters and worlds and stories that are interesting to be told. To hell with the, is this serving the archetype correctly, or is this deconstructing things correctly? Art shouldn't be a means to an end, full stop. It should be an end in itself. We should care about the characters because we care about the characters, not because they serve some this quasi-utilitarian Jungian function, and not because they serve some sort of broader socio-political woo, because they're worth caring about, and because their worlds are interesting and logically coherent.
It's weird that you brought up the character thing, because you don't really care much about characters.
Well, I mean,
you have your favorite characters, obviously, but for reasons I can understand, it's just like you meant characters overall, which is weird to me because I'm usually the characters guy.
Yeah, you're the characters guy because that's what draws you into stories more, and I'm usually more about the world. But the thing is, interesting worlds are great and all, but if you're following a character that is uninteresting in that world, or is uncompelling in that world, and compelling doesn't necessarily mean morally upstanding, just because, like it or not, whether you believe that ideas exist independently of the people who think of them or not, I personally do to some degree, but whether you believe that or not, these characters are supposed to be beings in their own right in some sense. Not saying like empirically, I'm not saying, you can create a clone of a character just by thinking about it real hard or whatever. But in logical terms, these characters and these worlds exist on their own terms, and they should be treated as full and rounded as they can be. And when you enforce something from without, externally on a character or a world or a story, you are inherently doing a disservice to that world and to that character and to that story. Because the purpose of it isn't to serve your deconstructionalist political agenda or your traditionalist Jungian agenda. It's to exist because they inherently have value, just like every other thing in the fucking universe.
Shall we?
Yeah, banana.
Banana.
And who are essentially egomaniacs, villains, murderers, rapists, and narcissists with really, really good publicity and an entire giant billion-dollar corporation around them promoting them and ensuring that they are loved in the public eye. There is Homelander, fascist Superman, Queen May.
All right, a couple things. Because I feel like she's more trying to make a point for her argument.
Mm-hmm.
And not in the way that I hoped she would.
Mm-hmm.
Because, right. I think she's forgetting the world of the boys is a thing. And like how Vought, the company that quote unquote protects them, publicly at least, kind of made them that way, I guess you could say.
By torturing them and depriving them of human connection.
Yeah, it's very evident with Homelander. And not all of them a lot of them are kind of shit on the Seven.
And also, not to nitpick, but she used the word fascist there, and I think she might be using it in the informal sense of just authoritarian, which Homelander probably is. But
he's really just, again, he is a Superman. That's not debatable, obviously. It's just,
yeah,
he is Superman if, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it. If he wasn't raised by the Kents and was basically raised as a lab rat in LuthorCorp. LexCorp, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Funny enough,
Yeah, but my point was, I would agree that Homelander is an authoritarian. I'm not certain that necessarily makes him a fascist.
yeah, it's actually funny. Sorry, I was just gonna bring up an example.
Mhm.
Because spoilers for The Boys, season 2. Stormfront. Thank you. Is when she's talking to I believe it's Ryan, or is it Brian?
Either way.
The son of Homelander.
Mm-hmm.
You know, talking about white genocide and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's. I don't know if I could say the word. Like, I want to say the word, but might get us flagged or something.
Go for it, come what may.
Well, you know, Stormfront is, as it's shown in the show, is a Nazi.
Yeah.
An actual Nazi. Like a full blown, like actually from like World War II Nazi.
Well, I mean, she's named after the only viable white supremacist website on the planet at the moment. So yeah.
I feel like that's just dying out, to be fair.
Which good riddance, and in case anyone needs confirmation of that, yes. Anyone who focuses on their race or their demographic information as the most important thing about themselves and wants to develop a socio-political ideology around it, you are a short-sighted, childish, dick-headed moron, and you need to get help.
Right. So, you know, John, Homelander, you know, when she's talking about that to his son, he's a little off put by it. Like, I don't think he doesn't really believe in that. To be fair, he is a football narcissist, but it's never been about race to him. He just kind of thinks he's superior to everyone because, you know, he kind of is.
Okay, yeah, and this is the thing. Just because Homelander might have a certain philosophical belief that he is superior to everyone, because by most objective measures that is the case, because he is faster than everyone, stronger than everyone, can fly, yada yada yada. At least until he starts, thinking about running for office or some such thing, we don't know if and when that translates to his political beliefs. Not to mention the fact that fascism essentially requires like state intervention in corporations, and I've never seen Homelander postulate anything along those
Right.
lines. The
Again,
core doctrine of fascism is everything within the state, nothing outside of the state, everything in service to the state.
right.
And I don't think we've seen enough evidence of Homelander honestly even knowing enough about politics to formulate a position on this, let alone being in favor of some kind of super heroic patch. With someone like Magneto, you can definitely say that. He is definitely at least adjacent to a fascist mutant, because he wants effectively mutant supremacy, because he thinks that mutants, not without reason, mind you, but he thinks that mutants are better than ordinary humans, and therefore ordinary humans must submit and serve mutants.
Okay. The fact that he's willing to torture. Again, I'm sure a lot of people who know the X-Men and stuff. Like this is a tangent, mind you, but
But I was trying to help her argument a little bit, and if he ever sees this, to understand the point I'm making. My objection isn't that Homelander is an authoritarian, which he is. My objection is just because someone holds authoritarian tendencies doesn't equate necessarily to fascism, because fascism is a particular ideology that has particular tenets and requirements to qualify itself.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there's no evidence that Homelander knows enough or cares enough about politics to give a damn.
Matt.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Fuck. Right. So with like the Magneto thing, and again, this is just a tangent. I want to finish before I get to like the example I was going to bring up with another example for Homelander.
Mhm.
The Magneto thing is like his character. You know, obviously we all know like he's a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust, and that has intrinsically shaped his worldview and stuff.
Yep.
To such an extreme point that basically he cannot see that he's become the very thing that
he wanted to escape from as a child.
Yeah.
Which you often see that with abuse victims. You often see an identification with the beliefs or the tactics of the people that abuse them, because if that's your first exposure of what it is to be human, and I'm using human in the general sense, then that's what you're going to translate being human as in your mind. It's why it's important that parents be very, very gentle with their kids to some degree, because if not, you will break their brains. Their brains are fragile. Do not break your brain.
Thusly, like again, from an evolutionary standpoint, I can understand him. Like, you know, mutants are the next step in evolution. Therefore, they are legitimately actually evolutionary superior to humans.
Yes, they can do things that human beings cannot do. Therefore, objectively, not placing any moral judgment or any value judgment on it, but if we're viewing things solely in objective descriptive terms, somebody that can control magnetism on a fundamental level of the universe is better than someone who has no ability to do any such thing.
Right. What's funny is, you remember, like, I don't think we ever covered it here, but they wanted to make, like, people were petitioning for Magneto to be black. Remember that?
He was already a Holocaust survivor. You don't need to.
I mean, there were blacks part of the Holocaust as well and stuff. So.
I know. I'm not saying there weren't. I'm just saying.
Oh no, I know. I feel like again.
I'm guessing the argument was something along the lines, white man, therefore.
No, well, to be fair, they had like ideas for like Denzel Washington, like really great African American actors, which I would have been fine with. Like,
yeah,
you know,
I wouldn't be opposed. I'd also be okay with Idris Elba or Chiwetel Ejiofor or.
Idris was kind of. I'll be honest, he's kind of overused at this point as an actor. Plus, he's like MCU. He was already Heimdall, so.
That's true. Honestly, for Magneto, I'm not sure who I would cast. But back to the point, because we've spun off into this sidebar.
Again, the whole point that I'm getting at is, honestly, if I were Magneto, I'd just wait for, because eventually, again, it's just an evolutionary thing. Mutants.
If he's correct, then mutants will outbreed humans before too long, and then he won't have to argue with anyone.
Yeah, it's just a thing. Which is why, like, I also, again, this is another tangent, just because, like, we're kind of already here.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually writing, like, an idea of how I would have wrote the Marvel Universe in the comics.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, if I was to do, like, actual timeline-wise, mutants wouldn't be as prejudiced. They wouldn't have been prejudiced. Mutants wouldn't have been hated as they are in modern day, as they were like back in the 60s, like when they started to really pop up.
Mm-hmm.
That just makes sense, you know?
Because we've had lifetimes to deal with it now.
Yeah.
But back to the point I was originally making. With Magneto or someone like that, you can make an argument of him being fascist, because he literally goes off and makes his own country and basically runs it that way. you need look no further than the House of M storyline as evidence of that. And the same thing is true, albeit to a slightly lesser degree with Doctor Doom. Or at the very least, he's better at it than Magneto is. But with characters like Doom and Magneto, you can call them fascists because they literally go off and essentially create a fascist country. But with Homelander, apart from him thinking that he's superior on an objective, like existential perspective, he doesn't, for example, advocate the Seven should rule over anyone. If anything, he just wants himself, if anything. But again, there's no evidence that he knows or even gives a damn about politics, because he's kind of a shallow meathead, which, given how sheltered he was, kind of makes sense.
Right. Also, right. I'm sorry. The example I want to provide was, again, this relates to Homelander and his son. Where Homelander is telling his son, like, they are akin to gods. Again, highlighting his narcissism and stuff. Like, granted, he also genuinely wants to be a good father. Like, but he's been so fucking warped.
He's fucked in the head, so unfortunately, all the things he tries to do will end up being fucked in the head.
Right. But, the fact that he said he wants, and again, one of his major flaws is that he actively just wants to be liked by everyone. Like, he has such an insensitive ego.
Yeah, he needs in discussions of like cluster P and narcissism, they call it narcissistic supply. He believes himself to be like a god, so he needs to be worshipped like one in order to validate his sense of godhood.
Right.
And if he doesn't get it, there's what's called ego dystony between his self-image of this, all-powerful godlike being and his actual self-image, which is to say, on some level, he's still the broken child that was raised in a laboratory. And he has to somehow bridge that gap, or he goes nuts, which is why he often goes nuts. Nobody could possibly bridge that gap, superpowers or no superpowers.
Yeah, he's a really fucked up Superman, and not in a way that I mean, I find it interesting on a writing level as a writer myself, but just on a character level, I'm kind of over it.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work now to write a good dark Superman story, almost as much as it does to write a good actual Superman story. And that's why this whole thing started. This whole twisting Superman thing started, was because for some reason a lot of people believe that with as much power as Superman has relative to ordinary human beings, there is no way he could possibly choose to use that power correctly. There's no way you could give godlike power to someone and it wouldn't go to their head. Appears to be a lot of people's supposition with Superman. The problem is that is fundamentally broken and cynical. And it assumes that anyone given enough power would go on a rampage. Now, granted, there are people, probably,
a lot would. However, I myself, being the hopeful optimist I am, I'm not naive, as some would call me.
Yeah, he can't be, because life went and smacked him upside the head a couple dozen times.
I being the optimist that I am, I would like to believe, and I've actually seen a lot more good than I've seen bad. Well, comparatively.
Mm-hmm.
To believe that if people were given the powers of Superman, they would use them correctly. And I'm sure Dawn will make a joke at my expense on the fact that most probably if I was given the powers of Superman, I legitimately would just be Superman.
I'd hope that you'd have a little bit more fun with it, but who knows? I think if you ever did get the powers of Superman, that would be my job. I'd be the guy that reminds you, okay, good for you for working your ass to the bone, saving a bunch of people and stuff, but you have the powers of freaking Superman, man. Remember to occasionally enjoy them. Um, as for me, I wouldn't even want the powers of Superman because the powers that Superman has aren't ones that I would want. I'd probably want more along the lines of a Dr. Manhattan, if anything.
I don't know. The omniscience, I think, would drive me insane.
Yeah, but that's the difference, and that's the other thing. I'm sick of treating it like Superman has so many more abilities than the average human.
I mean,
Because when you get right down to it, his powers are very basic. He just happens to have a lot of the power that he has. Like, physical strength isn't that impressive. He just happens to have a fuck ton of it. But compare him to somebody like Dr. Manhattan, and yes, this is why I think in an actual honest to goodness fight, Dr. Manhattan would probably win
it's not
if
even
the
a fight.
writer wasn't fucking him over.
It's not even a fight, though.
Yeah, Dr. Manhattan manipulates the fundamental energies of existence, and the fundamental energies that bind energy and matter together, and he's a being made of pure energy. And when you take into consideration that most of Superman's powers come from the yellow sun radiation of the Earth, Dr. Manhattan felt like it. He could probably just reach into Superman's cells, pull out all the the solar energy, and then Superman is effectively human, and then it becomes a non-fight. That being said, I understand that I probably think that because I think in the abstract and in like energetic, mystical terms more than most people do. So a lot of people would view getting the powers of Superman as basically becoming omnipotent. And a lot of humans would probably start religions if someone all of a sudden demonstrated the powers of Superman if we didn't already know what Superman was. But that being said, there are people like myself who, given absolute power, would go a little bit nutty. I personally hope that I would end up somewhere in the vicinity of Castlevania's Dracula, but that's just me.
Okay. God,
But some people are good people who, despite everything that life has thrown at them and then some, remain good people miraculously in defiance of everything.
I got lucky. Also, hello.
Yeah.
Anyway, God, that was a tangent. Shall we?
Banana.
I don't know.
Hey, cynical, disillusioned, bisexual Wonder Woman, A-Train, drugged up speedster Flash, the Deep, rapey Aquaman, translucent, sex offender, black noir, a murderer but cool, Stormfront, literal Nazi, stars.
Okay. Honestly, I feel bad for like Aquaman, who constantly keeps getting shit on by like media. Like he's actually like a really cool character.
And if Superman is the standard by which we're judging things, he's not all that less powerful than Superman.
No, he just has to. Honestly, if he's in the water, then Superman's fucked.
Yeah, I mean, and also he does actually have telepathy. It's not just sea life that he can communicate with. If he felt like it, he could be a telepath almost on par with John, the Martian Manhunter.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of Johns.
Yeah.
Wow, there really are a lot of Johns in the DC universe. How did I not see this before?
Because it's not something that most people draw attention to, so it never really comes up. But yes, there are a fuck ton of people named John.
they're also like really different characters, each one with a name.
Yes. Though I want to see a buddy comic between the Martian Manhunter and John Constantine, just because I think it would be hilarious.
Which Martian Manhunter though? Are we talking Silver Age or are we talking I guess modern? I mean, to be fair, it doesn't really change often.
I was about to say is there, like in the case of some of the characters there were massive changes, but in the case of John, it just sort of he was, you know, this wise, troubled survivor of a dead planet, and he remains this wise, troubled survivor of a dead planet.
Yeah, I wish they would change him up a bit. Not like overtly, obviously. It's just something.
I like him. I like him as he is. I think it's.
No, I know.
I think it's good
I
that
know. What it is, like, add something to his character. Like, you know, he can't just be the last son of Mars forever. I mean, like, he can, but
I'd like to know more about Martian culture, if I'm entirely honest.
yeah.
That would be, if I was writing like a Martian Manhunter solo series, that would be my move. Like flashbacks between him now and him on Mars.
Honestly, you know, I what I would love is if we're getting into this. God, we're going into a fucking tangent. What if he's trying to basically create a museum or like a time capsule as he's trying to remember everything about Martian culture for other people to know about? Because, again, you have to assume, despite the long life he's lived comparatively to humans as a Martian, he has an expiration date.
God only knows when it is, because I mean he can literally control the molecules of his body to look however he wants to look, and generally characters with that kind of power don't age much.
I think internally there is something there that makes him age. Like inwardly, not outwardly, obviously.
Right. I think at this point it'd probably be more psychological, although if you really, really wanted to do a really dark turn on this, Martian Alzheimer's would be fucking horrifying.
So kind of like Charles from Logan.
Yeah, even worse though.
I mean, he is a powerful telepath, like Martians usually are. So the Alzheimer's thing could.
Yeah, I'm not sure how power scaling wise it would work, you know, between him and Charles. But also the Martian Manhunter does have a fuck ton of other powers as well. It's kind of like if Superman ever was to get something like Alzheimer's with his, and I know I just spent like 20 minutes bashing on Superman's powers and calling them basic shit, but relative to frail humans, if he ever forgot how to control his strength, this would go very, very bad very, very quickly.
God, for decelerated Kryptonian aging.
Especially if you take into account that people with Alzheimer's often get confused because of memory lapses and cognitive lapses, and it results in them going on rage-filled rampages and so on. So
yeah, we gotta should at least get to the 10-minute mark.
Yeah, let's move.
Yeah, banana.
Carl Urban as Billy Butcher, the leader of The Boys, who single-handedly creates a new king for me every episode. He's like that hot. Every time he wears a sweater, I'm just kind of like, I am attracted to men still. Wow. The Boys is the kind of show that is so cynical that it's both brilliant at times with how dark it allows itself to go. But also sometimes the show and its creators tell on themselves for being those who only see superheroes through a lens of whiteness.
I was, until she said whiteness, I was kind of on her side.
Yeah, and then it just all went up in flames.
What the fuck is whiteness?
Okay, when they say whiteness, they mean effectively Western culture.
What the? Why can? Okay, that's better. Honestly, that's so much better than saying fucking whiteness. Like I'm not trying to like get angry. It's just it's a weird choice of word. You know?
Yeah, and further, usually what they mean when they say whiteness is like meritocracy and or individualism is generally what they mean when they say that.
That's so much worse. It's so much fucking worse.
I know. It's
Like,
I mean,
it's right.
reasonable and well educated she might be, but she's still a writer for the Mary Sue.
How is it her articles are more sound than the video? Like, I'm not trying to harp on her, but
because we never really see her talking extemporaneously. Articles are written, which honestly makes it all the more interesting that people like Rachel Leachman will just obliviously write basically whatever they want, whereas she will at least. I imagine with Princess Weeks or Melina here, she at least goes through a couple rough drafts of what she's writing before she writes it. Which again should be the bare minimum, but in today's day and age, with today's online journalism and commentariat approach to things, might as well be enough to win her a freaking Pulitzer Prize.
I mean, to be fair, I don't really rough draft stuff. Granted, I haven't really written anything like in depth. I've done more plotting and stuff.
Yeah, you're usually in the process of preparing to write things more so than writing them, and that sounded way more dismissive and bitchy than I meant it to.
No,
so sorry.
No, I mean, you're right. I don't really think it was as bitchy or dismissive as you think it was.
Well, it sounded mean in my head. But by that I mean you actually plan out your stories before you put pen to paper, so that when you put pen to paper, you're less likely to make obvious mistakes.
To be fair, when I was younger, I just wrote off the cuff, and honestly, I feel like I suffered a lot for that in terms of storytelling. So I figured it's easier for myself now to plan it all out and stuff.
Especially because some of the ideas you have are very, very big.
Yeah, especially because of that.
Anyway, Banana.
Yeah, Banana.
As for the show, said in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter,
the myth of superheroes themselves, though often created by young Jewish writers in the 30s and 40s, don't really apply as cleanly today because there's these undeniable fascist underpinnings to it. They're there to protect white patriotic America.
What the fuck?
Okay, firstly...
Well, one thing, this is from Eric Kripke, who, as people would know, is also who was the showrunner / creator of Supernatural. One of them, I believe. Please continue. I'll get more into it, but you do your thing first. I'll be back.
Okay. Thing the first, patriotism and even to a certain extent nationalism are not inherently fascist. Individualism or hyper-individualism are not inherently fascist, as long as they're not paired with some kind of state apparatus that needs to control everything, or as long as they're not paired with the tendency to want to control everything. And undeniable fascist underpinnings, you say. Well, allow me then to blow your freaking mind, Mr. Kripke. I deny the fascist underpinnings of most superheroes. Especially because in 9 times out of 10, when there have been fascist regimes that have been successful enough to rate a historical mention, superheroes, at least for the majority of the 20th century, were on the opposite side. Superman literally picked up Hitler and flew him to the UN in one issue. Captain America. Need I even say all of the things that every person online knows about Captain America already? Like, punching Hitler was not just his first issue, but his second issue, because they reprinted it, goddamn you. As Stan Lee said in his interview for the excellent documentary Comic Book Superheroes Unmasked, we were fighting Hitler before our government was fighting Hitler. when the Soviet Union was douching it up in Eastern Europe, it was it was the incentive they needed to bring back characters like Captain America, and Superman went on a comic punching kick. And most of the reasons people were opposed to communism in the 50s had very little, if anything, to do with actual communism, and everything to do with Stalin and Lenin being dickheads. Not saying there aren't reasons to oppose communism. Lord, no, I'm not saying that. There are, in fact, reasons to oppose communism like a motherfucker. But for most people, the things that they opposed about the Soviet Union were the humanitarian travesties, which were linked to communism, mind you, and the fact that Stalin and Lenin were dickheads. Same thing with Mussolini, the original and the original fascist regime, the guy who literally coined the term fascism. Every major historical fascist regime has been opposed rather fervently and directly by comics. The only way you can say that comics are inherently fascist in this way is if you conflate capitalistic, individualistic, meritocratic democracies of the Western world with fascism, because there's a relationship between the idea of individualism and the idea of the strongman individualist, like you'd have in a fascist civilization, and that is the foundation on which this whole the Western world is fascist thing hinges. The idea of Western cultures are individualistic and meritocratic. So if that was left unencumbered to be followed to its most extreme position, you might get a hyper capable individual who wanted to rule over everything. But even then, chances are that would devolve more into a monarchy than it would a fascist system. And we know that because most of the Western civilizations at one point did have monarchies. Whereas the only couple of times that fascism or something approximating fascism has been tried, it's gone up in smoke and flames about 500 times the speed of sound. There's a reason why the only self-identifying fascist regime on the planet when he was originally alive was Mussolini's regime. And most of the other fascist regimes on the planet didn't even want to call themselves fascism because Mussolini fucked it up so badly. Moving forward. And I'm assuming Brainstormer left to do something while I ranted.
I am back.
Huzzah.
I was back here for a few minutes, but I just I didn't want to interrupt. So, Right. I think you pretty much covered everything I was kind of gonna say relating to the superheroes thing. Well, I was gonna bring up the fact that both. I mean, even during World War II, some comic superheroes were like super weird, and didn't have anything to do with like quote unquote. Well, actually, I think again during World War II they kind of did shift a lot of them to be.
Yeah, because again, to quote Stan Lee, we were fighting Hitler before our government was fighting Hitler. Godspeed, Mr. Stan Lee. Excelsior, sir.
Yeah. Which is fair. The White Thing.
I defy anyone from any culture not to find at least one superhero they like. And that's the other thing. There are different kinds of superheroes, my dear. There are.
Yeah.
Dozens upon hundreds of different kinds of heroes.
Like, yeah, I was gonna say that there were comics that pushed boundaries even during those times, but I don't think there were. I mean, I'm not going to say for concrete because I don't know myself. That there were. I mean, I know there were female heroes, like superheroes, that had their own titles and stuff. Not many, mind you, but and they
There
weren't.
were.
There were many of them, or there were female superheroes that had their own titles.
There were female superheroes that had their own titles.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. I meant I said not many, to my knowledge.
Right. But in any case, there's something else that just occurred to me that I want to touch on here, because I kind of glossed over the nationalism thing, and I feel it necessary to clarify what I mean when I said, you can be nationalist and patriotic without being fascist. The reasoning being there are many different kinds of nationalism, and the one that the Western world usually adheres to some degree is civic nationalism, not ethno-nationalism or statist nationalism, which are the two kinds that lead to things like fascism. Anyway, go back to what you were saying.
Right. Again, like you pretty much covered everything I think I was going to say, not in the sense you say it, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But again, superheroes aren't really. I might have more to say on the next thing, honestly, because I'm reading like the quotes here.
Mm-hmm.
I'll save my points if I get any. Yes.
All right. Banana.
Banana.
That's what they were designed to do. That's what they do. They're protecting the status quo. When the status quo is problematic, suddenly they become adversarial, not your hero. And I think it was written by a lot of people who at that time were trying their level best to fit in and vanish within white society. But we just don't live in that.
Okay. I have a few things to say.
Please.
They were designed, again, originally, like, actual basic thing, they were designed to sell comic books. Mostly. Before World War II, like, when they were, like, Pulp Adventures and, like, the magazines where they had the stories written up with some art, you know, like...
Yeah, and those in turn were inspired by Penny Dreadfuls and dime novels and adventure novels and so on.
Again, they were kind of, I don't want to say they were a means of, no, they were meant to sell things, you know. That's kind of what they were in the broadest sense.
Because we have to make money because most of us are dirt poor and have to eat and shit.
Yeah, and also Great Depression, so.
Yeah, that was the main cut and thrust of it. But beyond that, they mostly just wanted to tell decent stories about things you couldn't tell in other forms of storytelling.
Yeah. To be fair, I don't think. I mean, it would be interesting, and there have been some attempts at it. It's kind of awkward though. Novels. Like, imagine if the superheroes took off in novels first, then pulp comics, pulp magazines, I suppose.
I mean, there were pulps that were more writing intensive, like Solomon Kane was mostly text, for example.
I want to say no, Alec Elbenet was from like the 70s, I believe. So
61, if I remember correctly.
60s or 70s, you know, that time frame.
But even so,
also like the Shadow, the Phantom. I mean, granted, they weren't as well. They weren't like super heavy on writing. Honestly, they were kind of, again, you can make the argument. Actually, it's not really an argument. It's more knowledge of they were kind of quote unquote the first superheroes. They were the pulp heroes, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you had your Tarzans, your John Carter of Mars,
Doc Savage.
Yeah. Again, the Shadow,
Phantom, I believe,
Solomon Kane, Elric of Melbourne, all that business.
Miss Fury, I believe. Or was it the
I mean, if we're really going to go here, and I love pointing this out because for those of you who for some reason believe that mysticism and the occult don't belong in comics, and I've met people like that, and they are fucking infuriating.
what the fuck?
The character Doctor Occult, the character Doctor Occult actually predates Superman in terms of publication by like 3 years. So yeah, but
Occult.
yeah, Doctor Occult and Rose Psychic predated Superman in publication by 3 years.
It was the golden age of comics. I'm not gonna. Names were kind of on the nose.
To be fair, they were literally named by a like utopian cult of mystics. So the reason they're called that is because they didn't have names. Yeah, Dr. Richard Occult and Rose Psychic were their names.
Okay, you say the full name. That sounds cooler. It's just Doctor Occult. It's cheesy. Like it's a fun cheesy, but
it's a bit on the nose. Yeah, I agree.
But
I mean, I love him. He's one of my favorite like unsung obscure heroes. But but again, right. This was 1935, so yeah.
Again, that's fair. Again, it's just like when you say Doctor Occult, it's kind of cheesy. But when you say the full name, it actually that's really badass.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Richard Occult.
Mm-hmm.
But
and his assistant / future wife, Rose Psychic.
Why do I feel like there is some inspiration from Dr. Fate, from that character?
I mean, probably as far as I know of, and I've done quite a bit of research on this because Dr. Fate is my favorite character. Please stop fucking up, DC. That would be absolutely fantastic. Gardner Fox, the creator of Dr. Fate, who is also responsible for the creation of the Spectre and the Phantom Stranger.
Also the original Jay Garrick Flash.
Yeah. Created Dr. Fate as an homage to Lovecraft. His basic idea was, what if you told a Lovecraft style story but with someone capable of actually fighting off the Eldritch Terrors, which leads me to believe that I would have gotten along with Gardner Fox just perfectly well.
God, everything so much cooler back in the day. I mean, like there was obviously problems with it. It's just
because people actually tried.
Right, yeah, in terms of entertainment,
gave it in.
Yeah, in terms of entertainment, things seem to be a lot fucking cooler back then. Again, in terms of entertainment, actual society and shit kind of had its.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing, but
entertainment that seems fucking fantastic.
Yeah, it was better were the days when art was done for its own sake rather than as a means to an end.
Okay, but back to this, again, the whole design thing, designed to do, we already covered that. Then moving on to the next quote, they're protecting the status quo. When the status quo is problematic, suddenly they become adversarial.
Adversarial.
Thank you. Not your hero. Okay, I'm going to break this down. Name a hero that protects the status quo. Granted, in these days you can make an argument for it because for some fucking reason, the companies that own the IPs, specifically like the big two, DC and Marvel,
believe this shit instead of actually knowing their own history.
They're just not willing to push the status quo, change it,
Yeah. And again, using the Golden Age creator of Captain America example, according to Stan Lee in his interview for the documentary that was released in 2001, Comic Book Superheroes Unmasked, they were fighting Hitler before their government was fighting Hitler, mostly because they wanted to. The same is true for the creation of characters like Black Panther or Wonder Woman in the case of William Moulton Marston, another Golden Age contributor to the media or to the medium.
Right.
Comics have never been particularly concerned with the status quo because the people making comics have never been particularly concerned with the status quo because for the longest time, the people that were interested in both reading and writing comics were eccentric artistic weirdos who were philosophically nomadic and usually a little bit downtrodden or out of the ordinary.
Well,
Yeah.
granted, at that time, it was kind of frowned upon about being that, obviously, and some didn't. It's a whole thing. It's complicated.
Yeah, they had to make it in a world that didn't understand or care to understand about them. That's fair. But to say that in any order of magnitude the superhero is about supporting the status quo is really, really quite short-sighted. And I'm not saying in like a socio-political sense because I hate that fucking argument too of superheroes have always been social justice warriors. No, fuck you.
Yeah.
But the entire enterprise of comics is always, even taking the characters and their deeds out of it, comics have always kind of been about pushing the boundaries that other forms of media won't dare to go. That's why comics are so wonderfully weird as they are, because a bunch of people wanted to tell detective stories or adventure stories or sword and sorcery stories or mad science stories or what have you. And they bit by bit built these universes that all of these weird and wonderful and wacky things can coexist within. You can have Iron Man whose suit is entirely technological and built in a freaking cave. And you can also have Doctor Strange, who is a master of Eastern mysticism and the occult and magic and what have you. You can have, in the case of the very first, the Action Comics #1, the patient zero of the comic book industry, basically. You can have Superman, the last son of a dying alien world who's given superpowers by the yellow son of the earth, and yada yada yada.
Again, I'm sorry. This is the thing. I feel like I always, as a Superman fan myself, I feel like I have to add this all the time because we were talking about it earlier with like Homelander and like his kind of god complex.
Mm-hmm.
Superman is not fucking Jesus. If anything, if you want to compare him to
He's Moses because the people that made him basically made him a Moses allegory. They admitted to doing as much.
That was actually an argument used in a, I believe, educational dissertation on why comic books should be taught in a college classroom, like a comparison between Superman and Moses to a board of directors.
Also, well, that's I'll bring up what I was about to bring up later if it comes back up again. But you can have a character like Superman appear in the same book as Giovanni Zatanna, Zatanna's father, who honestly needs to get more love because as much as I enjoy Zatanna, people often just straight up forget about Zatara half the time, and it annoys me.
I do think, if anything, I would go more. I mean, nowadays I do feel like you kind of have to go with Zatanna a little bit more. But I honestly would focus a little bit more, maybe like in her first movie, on a legacy aspect.
Or hell, the relationship with her father might be something to give her character. Hell, have her father get killed by something, and then her first heroic act is defeating the thing that killed her father, or dragged into hell, or what have you. Because you can do that in a story that features, two very powerful. But my point is, even just conceptually, even just in terms of the scope and scale of the forces at play within comics always were about getting away with the sorts of stories that you couldn't get away with anywhere else. Because nobody wanted to publish H.P. Lovecraft's novellas or what have you, but weird science or Weird Science pulp magazine did, and the rest is history. Nobody wanted to publish Siegel and Schuster's Superman comic story, but Detective Comics did, and the rest is history. Nobody wanted to publish Robert E. Howard, and I forget the pulp magazine that he was involved with. It may well have been the same weird fiction magazine as Lovecraft did. But regardless, this is a medium constructed out of the stories that publishers looked at and said, this is too weird, we can't publish this. And that happened for decades. And so as a result, comics are by their very nature weird, wonderful, wacky, and upscale in a way that turns a lot of people off. And that's why comics are the way they are. Because some people can handle the weird shit that comics throw at you, and some people need their hand held a little bit, need to be slowly dripped into the bath of weirdness.
But yeah, no. Again, an argument can be made for today's comic books, specifically within
Big Two.
the Big Two. Thank you. Sorry, I don't know why I was forgetting that. But with keeping like the status quo or protecting it, but they've never really been about that. Not really.
And to say that is extremely short-sighted on Eric Kripke's part.
Yeah, it's also kind of proving, like, I don't want to insult the guy on like his knowledge of superhero stuff, because I don't really know.
But that he doesn't get superhero comics. Like, he doesn't understand them.
Well, I don't think he understands. I don't want to say it. Like, I was gonna say, like, I don't think he understands comics as a whole, but I feel like that's a little too accusatory.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not. I refrain
Yeah,
from like legitimately saying that.
Yeah, but he doesn't appear to get superhero comics like at all.
And then the last thing we stopped on was, and I think it was written by a lot of people who, at the time, were trying their level best to fit in and vanish within white American society. I don't know why she cut American out when she was speaking of the.
Because to her, there's very little difference, so it doesn't really matter, I would imagine.
Hi, Hispanic, American. How you fucking doing?
Yeah, and gay, crippled, occultist American. Yeah, but let's not get too bogged down into that nonsense, or we'll be here forever. Anyway,
what I was gonna say is, like, and I brought this up earlier, is you also have to look at the context of the people that were writing started the whole superhero craze during the golden age of comics at the time. You know, like the time frame they were in. Where, again, the whole being a writer of a picture magazine or pulp magazine was kind of frowned upon. You know, they didn't really. That is the weirdest thing to me. Like, they never really didn't they have like art schools back then and stuff?
Yeah, but it was all much in the same way as it is now. Uppity pricks going, this is real art, that isn't real art, and anything made for the plebs or on the cheap must definitely be not real art.
Fuck you then. Fuck all those people. Anyway,
I know it's the most insufferable thing I ever hear, and yet it keeps fucking.
But again, like, the people that were writing these things, again, were people of the Great Depression. Again, just, you know, like, I don't know, 10 years, like during the 30s, you know, it was the Great Depression.
Yeah.
For a long time, I think it was around like 1930. Well, maybe still during 1938, the Depression was still.
Yeah, it started in 29 and then carried in through most of the 30s.
Right. Okay. But my point being is, people were struggling back then. There was still systemic injustice happening obviously. It's just like, the problems that were happening at the time added to this like whole complicated thing. But again, like artistic and kind of the Poindexters and stuff, granted,
Mhm.
I think most of the writers were actually really cool people comparatively.
I mean, Jack Kirby asked for leave once because he wanted to go off and fight Nazis, so
Didn't he?
he did.
Yeah. Plus, dude smoked cigars.
Yeah, he asked. Like I love that. That's one of the best anecdotes about Jack Kirby I've ever heard. Is he's just like, I need some time off because I have to go and fucking fight Nazis because fuck them. That's why. Like I just Jack Kirby was the kind of person they never make anymore.
No, they did not. No, I mean, if you actually look into a lot of the people that actually worked on comics back then,
Mhm.
they were like really interesting, cool people most of the time. I mean, some of them were just like average, ordinary kids. Like I think
Mhm.
Stan Lee or Stanley Martin Lieber
Mhm.
was, I think, like in his teens when he started working at Timely Comics.
Yes, because his uncle owned the company at the time, I think, or was the editor. One of the two. I can't
Yeah.
remember which.
But it's just like, what's weird is like, I mean, granted, most of them were Jewish, which is fine. And again, you can make the argument that superheroes were kind of created as a Jewish power fantasy. The argument could be made. I'm not saying it
Yeah.
is. Just,
At least with Superman, I'd concede that argument because Siegel and Schuster literally gave an interview talking about where they got the idea, and it was basically like, they were commiserating each other because, I believe it was Siegel tried to ask a girl out again, and she said no, and so he started thinking about what if I was really terrific and could just throw cars around and stuff.
yeah. So again, that's fair.
Which I'm sure in the modern context sounds very incel. Which I hate that we've turned, the lonely, broken types. We've changed from calling them nerds to calling them incels. That's really all that's happened, effectively. We're still hating on the same people. It's just we call them a different word now.
It's hard to be optimistic in this world. Anyway, shall we?
You can't be cynical because that's partly my job. Yeah.
I know, but I have my limits. Anyway, shall we?
Yep, banana.
Banana.
That time anymore. So the myth of the superhero taken straight, that's where it starts to become fascist. Because they're protecting a world that doesn't and shouldn't exist. Superheroes are inherently MAGA. In terms of Stormfront, there was nothing specifically personal behind it. It was just, I hate Nazis, I hate alt-right white nationalism, I hate racism in all its forms.
They're protecting a world that shouldn't exist.
It doesn't and shouldn't exist.
That.
Okay,
that just.
I'm sorry. I have something.
Go ahead.
I said this once with Superman, like in a stream. Once, well, I typed it in chat. This was actually long before I really started getting into streaming myself. Is like it's how I described like the dichotomy between Batman and Superman. Batman is like is kind of the superhero we would be if we became superheroes. A majority of humans.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of cynical hero. Still doing good, but always has that uneasiness with people.
Yeah, always calculating, always paranoid, always thinking of contingencies, always brooding, always dark.
Right. Which is why I will always advocate that Batman should be the villain in Injustice, more so than Superman. But again, that's a topic for a whole different thing.
practically it makes more sense as well because we know that Batman keeps contingencies for all the other League members around. But
he's actually one of the most. Forget like Superman or Wonder Woman or even the fucking Flash. Batman is one of the most dangerous fucking superheroes in the world.
Because give him 5 minutes and he can take down literal gods if he feels like it.
Yeah. But
Superman has all this power, and that makes him scary because reasons.
Okay, here's, and this is what I said about Superman. Superman is the hero / kind of person we want to be. The kind of Atlas-like being that can bear the weight of the world upon our shoulders and still stand strong. That's how to draw comparisons to mythology a bit, that's how I kind of see the kind of personality / morality of Superman. Well, it's one of the ways I've seen it, at least.
Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why I don't really like either, I shouldn't say I don't like Batman or Superman, but one of the reasons they don't rate at the top of my list in terms of characters that I care about is because I don't really identify with either of those approaches. I'm the kind of person who would prefer to just gain power through nothing but knowledge and skill. Not as an instrument to some other thing like Batman does. Like he uses his knowledge to create technology or to, learn martial arts or whatever. But in terms of for its own sake, like Dr. Fate literally takes the fundamental building blocks of reality, pure energy, and manipulates them into doing various different things purely because he has the knowledge to do so. That's, what makes me different from most people, I guess, because most people do fit somewhere in that Superman versus Batman dichotomy, and I'm over here just like, call me when you need me to slay Cthulhu.
But and again, the thing, at least with like the traditional superheroes, not like superheroes like Dawn's interested in, like, no offense, Dawn, or like
None taken. I know, weird.
Yeah, one of my favorite superheroes is you make more argument of an anti-hero like Spawn.
Mm-hmm.
Traditional superheroes like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, the Flash, Green Lantern.
Spider-Man, the Hulk, Cap, so on.
Yeah, they're the ones trying to fight for a better world while also protecting the world from threats that could inherently damage it, like alien invasions, wannabe super tyrants, time travelers, all that shit.
Yeah, the characters I like. This is a way that I like to sort of analogize it to make it simpler. The superheroes and supervillains and all that are players on the stage. Characters that I like are stagehands that make sure the stage is still there for them to play on.
Right. I also have a way of saying it as well. Yeah, like I get your point.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if the heroes that don't like the very like monk, wizard, like superheroes, are doing their job right and well, you never
notice them.
Yeah, you don't notice whether the sun rises or not.
Because that's just normal for you. But if Doctor Strange fails to...
their whole job is basically to make sure the sun rises and sets every day.
Yeah, which I believe was a analogy that I
believe
you
so
got
too.
from me.
Yeah,
I remember correctly, because I remember saying that before.
Yeah, it's a good way to describe it as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because nobody has to worry about breaking the laws of physics, but if those laws became strongly worded suggestions, you'd start to notice.
What's weird is, and I'll type the character's name that you helped me work on, Dawn, is like in private chat.
Yeah.
There's a character that I've written is like both a player on the stage and also a stagehand. If we're doing that analogy,
And
I'm sure you get which one I'm talking about.
Yeah. I saw it in the
Yeah.
chat. But yeah, and that's exactly why that character overstays his welcome eventually, because you kind of can't do both. You either have to be a being that is distant enough from humanity to protect existence as a whole, or you can be somebody who has a more concrete impact on the comings and goings of humanity. And the character that Brainstormer, mentioned to me in private chat, so as to not spoil or potentially result in the stealing of our material.
I mean, it's technically a public domain character, but
still,
it's my version of the character, so
yeah. But even so, the main reason why he essentially has to die in the course of our story is because he did break that rule. He did try to impact both the mundane world of people and societies and civilizations, and simultaneously use the fundamental forces of existence to do so.
that reminds me, Thursday we might have to come up with a successor to that character.
Honestly, I'd rather just leave it without him without a successor, to be entirely honest.
Okay. We'll discuss more.
In the same way that with Falcon and Winter Soldier, I think it would have been better if they had just not tried to replace Cap full stop, because there's no point in trying to replace Cap.
Fair enough. Well, I had some ideas, but again, we'll discuss Thursday.
Yep. Lots to do on Thursday. We're thinking of making a second show this week, just because for some reason when we decided to do this instead of news this week, because it was our 125th episode, the entire universe was just like, here is all the news you'll need for the next 2 or 3 shows in a row, and we all went, fuck, when it rains it pours. It's a shame we can't do this.
You actually said that. I remember you actually said that.
Yeah, I think it was when you sent the Shang-Chi trailer, and I'm just like, well, god damn it, when it rains it pours.
God, sometimes I feel like the universe is actively just pissing on us.
Although in our defense, I think it might just be the sense of humor of a certain Queen of Fairy that I happen to be indebted to, good reasons.
Right. Yeah. Which are of your own volition, because you are kind of a dumbass sometimes.
I thought we could get along well, and I didn't. And I thought that maybe doing it in a way that no one else usually does it would earn me some respect from her. But one does not simply obtain respect from Queen freaking Mab. So, yeah.
Basically, he fucked up. That's the short. That's the short of it.
Yeah. The long and the short of it is, in November of last year, I started giving blood offerings to Queen Mab, otherwise known as the Unseelie Queen of Fae, otherwise known as the Queen of Air and Darkness, yada yada yada. And what I did was, I didn't have enough faith in my skills to do a full evocation of Mab, so I instead started making her offerings. Now, with her being the savage, bloodthirsty Queen of Winter, and with blood kind of being a universal currency among the supernatural, I figured it would make sense to give her offerings of blood. And what I said when I gave her those offerings was, look, I'm just getting started with this whole working with spirits thing. I know I'm going to fuck up. You probably also know that I'm going to fuck up. But I'd really prefer not to be smited every time I fuck up. So here is my literal blood. I have no problems with being bound to you. I have no problem serving the Winter Court, yada, yada, yada. Just, weigh the value of this blood, which is, again, basically universally valuable among the supernatural, against the mistakes that I make. I'm not going to make more mistakes because I have this insurance policy, but I'm aware that I'm going to make mistakes, and instead of apologizing for those mistakes or being punished for those mistakes, I'd rather let's get it out into the open and essentially, as a gesture of good faith, here is my blood. You may take whatever punishments you need out of my ass from this blood, and when the blood runs out, then tell me, and I will, make more offerings. That was the logic. It was essentially a insurance policy for my own inevitable dumbassery, because I didn't want to become the protagonist of a Russian or Slavic fairy tale. And considering I was working or trying to establish a relationship with Queen freaking Mab, that was entirely likely. But she interpreted that, apparently, according to some friends that I had that actually did bother to evoke her for me. She interpreted that blood as an attempted bribe rather than the insurance policy I intended it as, and now I owe her a debt because reasons.
How is insurance policy? You know what? Now I'm gonna ask. Do you want a long? We got this to do.
Yeah, banana.
Well, I actually, there were still some things I wanted to cover with this.
Mm-hmm.
Like the superheroes are inherently MAGA. That's clearly wrong.
Yeah, and what values are you attributing MAGA with, Eric? Because I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean. I know, obviously, MAGA was Trump's slogan, but the problem is, when you use a term like that, you need to define your terms, because a lot of people have a lot of different perspectives on what Trump is or does. So, what values do you think are MAGA in your mind? What values are you referring to? Is the problem.
Right. Okay. And the Stormfront stuff, I get it, but she was, I don't know, like, the character is weird. Like, she's cool, like, on a level of writing. And again, that can be said about basically every character in the show, because, like, despite it being, like, super cynical and kind of hate the genre that it's in,
It does so much.
the character writing is, like, really fantastic.
Yeah, like I understand why The Boys is popular. Don't get me wrong. I just wish it was more sincere. Fortunately, we kind of got the more sincere version of The Boys shortly after this video was published in the form of Invincible, which is basically The Boys done right.
Yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say. Shall we?
Yep, banana.
While I personally do understand and get Cripe's ultimate point, I think what is frustrating about his overall thesis is that for many queer kids, people of color, and other BIPOC people with different marginalized, their superheroes are not MAGA. Unless you're trying to say that Storm, T'Challa, Loki, the X-Men are all MAGA, and I don't really think that tracks at all.
Okay, and
again, I can kind of understand the point. It's just the context that's given.
Yeah, and also, Ms. Molina.
Pendulum.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I keep wanting to call her Princess Weeks because that's who she is. But anyway, the thing is, even if you are queer, BIPOC, all that business, you can still like heroes like a Superman or a Batman or, in my case, a Dr. Fate, a Doctor Strange, a John Constantine, so on.
Or for me, Spawn, the Crow.
Yeah. The demographic a person occupies doesn't limit them from liking any character they want. There are men whose most favorite character in all in all of comics is Wonder Woman, and no, not just because she's hot, although I would imagine a lot of.
Actually, I was gonna go Power Girl.
Yeah, and the reason I didn't go Power Girl is because a lot of people too like Power Girl solely because she's hot.
Well, actually, but I mean, like, I'm aware of the character. I'm not like, it's weird. Like, I'm a big fan of like Superman, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't looked much into Power Girl, mainly because there has been a lot of her recently.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been
right, but and the other half of that is just because someone is LGBT or BIPOC or what have you, doesn't mean they have to like characters like the X-Men. In fact, I've run into a lot of people, including myself, who really resent getting shoved into the "you must really like X-Men because they're oppressed and marginalized and shit" box, because you're in a marginalized identity, which is bullshit. Now, granted, there is some connection between what a character is like and what readership or viewership they might attract. Like, for example, friend of the channel and longtime acquaintance. I'm not sure he would consider us friends, but an acquaintance of mine, Weaponized Nerd Rage, is a gun nut. Loves the Punisher to death. And I believe at one point he was even in the military. Although I don't remember off the top of my head if Wep was ever in the military, if he was just really, really, really into like gun culture. But point being, in that case, it kind of makes perfect sense that Wep would enjoy characters like the Punisher, in the same way as I'm sure it doesn't surprise anyone, or even if you didn't know me well, it probably wouldn't surprise you, knowing that I am a practicing occultist and a practicing magician, or a magical practitioner. I hate that I can't use the word magician without people automatically thinking illusionist instead of like magic user.
I mean, to be fair, they did kind of, I don't want to say coin, but appropriated the word.
Yeah, one of these days there's going to be an appropriation conversation about that shit, and I
mean, you could say wizard.
Yeah, but yeah, wizard requires a level of skill that I'm not sure I'm at yet.
Okay.
But point being, most people probably wouldn't find it all that surprising learning that I'm a practicing occultist, and also learning that my geekdom, my specialization in terms of geek culture and comics, is very much in the vein of a Dr. Fate, a Doctor Strange, a John Constantine, the Sandman, all of those type of characters. Because it makes sense, given my interest in magic and the occult, that I would like to see magic and the occult presented both somewhat accurately and well. But see, it doesn't work quite that same way with race and gender, because demographics are largely unimportant to who you are as a person. Your interests, hobbies, and skills reveal a lot more about you than your demographic does. For example, I am also a massive fan of cooking and like cooking shows and stuff. Therefore, I like Alton Brown because he is probably my favorite host of a cooking show, and also Good Eats is one of the best shows on the topic of cooking ever made. Honestly, until this whole social justice everything must be classified under its demographic thing happened, I didn't even really notice or care that he was white. If he were black, I wouldn't give a damn. Because the thing that I like about Elton Brown is the fact that he is a massive geek and nerd and also a chef. Because that's more indicative of who he is as a person and his interests than the fact that he's a white dude.
Right. Yeah, like Don and I mentioned earlier. Like there are a lot of favorite characters. I mean, like they kind of fall under very like street level kind of characters usually.
Spawn being the exception. He goes all over the.
Also, the Crow kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those two have very. Spawn starts out at street level and then gets really like I don't want to say. It gets really supernatural.
Metaphysical in general. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say cosmic, but that didn't really make sense. To be fair.
Well, cosmic in like the metaphysical sense, sure.
Yeah.
Or like spiritual sense.
Right. And the Crow, that's supernatural vengeance, anti-hero stuff.
Those for you, I do kind of find funny because I know you well enough to know you ain't no freaking anti-hero. You are basically the Boy Scout. The only thing anti-hero about you is that you love, like Casey Jones and his manner of doing things.
Yeah. I think it's mainly just '90s stuff I'm really into. Like '90s.
Which to be fair, for every really edgy, cheesy '90s comic, there was a really, really great one.
Yeah.
Like for every Rob Liefeld story, there was a Sandman or a Alan Moore story or what have you.
Ironically, Rob Liefeld was able to get Alan Moore to work on some comics for him.
Wow, good for you, Mr. Liefeld.
Yeah. But also like one of my favorite Robins is Jason Todd. I've made no effort in hiding that.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because when he becomes Red Hood, he's a very interesting character and like challenges a lot of Batman's beliefs and ideals. So there you go, philosophical battle.
Uh-huh.
But what the fuck else was she saying? Because I'm trying to remember, like I was actually mentioning. Well, no, again, like everything she said before the last kind of freight line of things you're saying, I agree with.
Mm-hmm.
More, it's just, I think the conclusion she comes to is often the wrong.
Yeah, see, this is where we always part ways with her because she has a lot of really good points, and then starts to extrapolate them into really weird places that don't really follow from her.
Yeah,
points.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. But yeah, shall we?
Banana.
There's also an issue in how we have both stripped away the Jewishness of these superheroes and tend to flatten them into Christian figures, and also that we take a lot of very complicated, morally righteous characters and just turn them into being robots who follow orders without any sort of questioning. And that's also not true to who these characters were and have been.
Okay, I get that. I agree with immensely so. Minus the Jewish.
I mean, yeah, the Jewishness thing is iffy, but
I mean, I can understand it. It's just like
I would agree that the default assumption of Christianity is sometimes annoying.
Oh yeah.
Though it only really annoys me in cases where the character is definitively like not.
To be fair, I don't really
Christian.
think a lot of characters' religions have never really been a thing for them. I mean, like there are some like Ragman. From
or Daredevil is another good example of where Christianity is very important to them.
That's because like the religion of those characters is intrinsic to.
Yeah, it becomes an actual integral part of them, and that's why it usually pisses me off when somebody tries to make the case of Doctor Strange being a Christian or something. Like maybe before he was a sorcerer, you could make that argument, but there's no way in hell that
Uh,
he is a Christian anymore.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, possibly before. Actually, I don't know. He see like before when he was Stephen Strange, Doc Surgeon.
Yeah.
He honestly didn't. I'll be completely honest. He never struck me as like a
A
believer.
religious person at all. Yeah, I agree. If you had to put a gun to my head, I would say probably atheist before.
Or
He
at the
became
very least
sorcerer.
agnostic.
Yeah, and to their credit, this is one area where I think they did well in the Doctor Strange 2016 movie in making him basically a hardened materialist before being introduced to the mystic arts, and therefore his first exposure to the spiritual or metaphysical dimension was magic instead of religion. But in terms of the comics, I don't know where he falls in terms of religion. Again, if you had to put a gun to my head, I would say atheist probably, or at least somewhere in that general vicinity.
I also think
But
you can't really classify him now as like not as like the standard Doctor Strange, simply on the fact that I don't think he has faith in a higher power, mainly so that he knows that things of higher power exist.
yeah, when you can conjure a god into appearing before you, there really isn't so much faith involved. Period.
Again, it's like the phrase. I know you don't like the movie, but it's from the Keanu Reeves, John Constantine movie, the Constantine movie, as I think as you coined it, is
Yeah.
like Gabriel talking to John saying, "No, you don't have faith." I might be paraphrasing that, but
Yeah, which to me strikes me as a little bit of a cop out because, like, surely someone who invokes or involves themselves in metaphysics directly would be more ingratiated to the powers that be than someone who just passively accepts it without critical thought.
right.
Like
Um,
when you've literally spoken to gods, you would think that they would be closer to you than otherwise, but yeah.
Are we talking about John Constantine or are we talking about Doctor Strange?
I think just at magicians in general, or magic users in general in comics, probably and I'm not saying it didn't work for the sake of the Constantine movie. I know what they were going for, but at the same time, from a practical perspective, it's like, so you're telling me that if I literally go through the incredibly complex ritual process of summoning a deity, that deity is going to be pissed off at me, but if I just quietly, essentially try to telepathically mail it my thoughts in the form of prayer, it's going to look on that more favorably than if I just have a conversation with it. That really, really, really seems fucked up. And I think to the movie's credit, John literally does go that route of no, like that whole clusterfuck is a problem, and fuck you for giving me And the other problem is, John Constantine in the Constantine movie has second sight. I believe they imply from birth, whereas John proper learned his skills and opened his senses that way. So that might be why they were going that route. But that creates the problem of you gave him second sight and now we're mad at him for having it. That's stupid.
Sorry. Yeah. So again, like everything else besides like the beginning part, I agree with. I really don't have much to say. To be fair.
Yeah. I would agree that taking someone who is supposed to be a fully rounded being in their own right and turning them into whatever the plot needs at any given moment is a problem.
Yeah, again, Superman fan here. Not like avid, like super big Superman fan here. Like I don't have posters set up and like collectibles and all that shit. Mainly because I don't have the money to do so. and also
I actually do have posters of Dr. Fate, Dream of the Endless, Constantine, and I forget which other character I have. I know I have 4, but I want to get them. I want to get them framed so I can actually put them on the wall without damaging them.
right. But
So that's why my merch is not visible.
right, but like I'm saying, like I don't have. I'm not like an uber fanboy. Is what I mean of Superman.
Mhm.
But as a fan of Superman, you can imagine how much disdain I have for like the character proper, not really the analogs or the ripoffs of him.
Mhm.
Because I see those as their own thing. Like I always try to look at those as their own thing.
Mhm.
But with like the character proper, I have my issues with it when they make like again with like the Dark Knight Returns, where they turn him into basically a grunt for the corrupt, like the Ronald Reagan American government.
Mhm.
Where
Mostly because Frank Miller doesn't understand how Superman works,
don't get me started on that.
or needed someone for Batman to beat up that would be really impressive and important and shit.
Could have done like maybe 100 different other ways to get that Superman versus Batman fight.
Yeah, Frank.
Yeah. But yeah, the Dark Knight Returns, that version of Superman, who apparently they play up the part of him being like a quote unquote Boy Scout, to where he basically becomes a stooge for the government, which but like
I believe the way Frank Miller's Batman puts it is poor Clark always doing what mommy and daddy told you, or something to that effect.
I wish I had a tougher hand so I could put my fist through a wall right now. And then like the more famous one, which is Injustice, Superman, and we've done discussion about like how it really makes no sense for that character, for Superman to go off the deep end like that.
Mm-hmm. But the thing I was going to criticize Melina here on is, it seems like you only understand this for these characters, but you don't extend the other characters this same kind of complexity. I mean, you just cited a speech by Eric Kripke that reduces them down to fascist icons, basically, which again, no superhero basically has ever been, to my knowledge. The closest you can come, if you squint really, really hard, would be characters that have like Ayn Randian influence, like Rorschach and The Question, and even then, there is a vast, vast, vast canyon of difference between almost bordering on like ANCAP libertarianism, that is usually where Randian objectivists tend to land, and fascism, sort of they're on opposite ends of the right wing spectrum. They just happen to both be right wing ish. But yeah, no, all characters deserve to be well-rounded three-dimensional beings, because all characters exist for their own sake, not for
There
a
is
means to an end.
Yeah, there's leeway.
Or should.
Yeah, there's leeway with certain characters, specifically villains. I mean, I know we're talking about superheroes, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like it has to be mentioned that villains are actually a lot more diverse.
Yeah.
Lack of a better term.
But that's the difference between a good villain and a bad villain. A good villain is a fully rounded character with their own thoughts, beliefs, opinions, etc. and a bad villain is just a means to have the hero have someone to beat up correctly.
Yeah, Joker's. I'm sure we can both agree that Joker is just like pure evil. I mean, he has a philosophical discussion and
Yeah.
point to make, but ultimately,
Yeah, but that's the great thing about the Joker is that even though he is chaos incarnate, even though he is a very simple character, he's still a fully realized and well-rounded character.
mhm.
To the point that we've had 3 major Jokers within the course of my lifetime, or 4 if you count the Jack Nicholson one. I don't, because I think that character is too much Jack Nicholson, not enough actual Joker. But if we're talking the Mark Hamill version, the Heath Ledger version, and then of course the most recent one, the Joaquin Phoenix Arthur Fleck version, the Joker is the perfect example of a villain done to the fullest extent of roundedness, because starting with things like the Killing Joke and to a lesser extent Death in the Family, he genuinely acts as not just a fighting foil for Batman, but also a existential and philosophical foil for Batman.
Mhm.
So yeah, villain or not, hero or not, in my opinion, characters exist for their own sake mostly, and should be treated as such.
Sorry. Shall we?
Banana.
Superman has combated the Klan and Nazis. When they tried to pull that Nazi Captain America shit, people were fucking pissed. Rightfully so, considering Jack Kirby and his relationship to Nazis, because that character was literally created to kick the ass of Nazis. One of my
I never thought I would see the day where a social justice advocate would be admitting that Secret Empire was a terrible, terrible idea, but well done, madam. That's
Well, they said Nazi. Oh no, Nazi Captain America. I thought you said Nazi Superman. No, yeah, Nazi Captain America. Okay, yeah.
they
I think I was.
Yeah.
I think I was starting to glaze over once you started talking because I was expecting.
Yeah. But yes, well done.
Fair enough. Yeah. Again, most of it I can agree with, except for the point of superheroes were created to fight the Nazis. I mean, granted, some were,
Well, she was talking about Cap specifically.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
fair enough. I might again. I think I was tuning out a bit.
Okay. But yeah, I have no problem with this section. She's on board on a thing that I didn't think she would be on board with. I expected her to defend I would expect her to defend something like Nazi Cap or Jordan Peterson Red Skull, for example.
Dude, this is long before that happened.
That well, at least a couple months before. Yeah, but I fully agree here. The only thing is, while these characters have done that, I don't think it's important they've done that. And I think that's where she and I would disagree. She thinks that because those characters have done that, those characters should always do that. And do nothing but that. And I would say, while those battles were important, and I find it to be incredibly gratifying that they did fight those battles within the context of their stories,
and
that doesn't mean that the only purpose for someone like Superman or Cap is let's go Nazi hunting, derp.
That sounds like something you'd hear from Inglourious Bastards.
A bit.
Oh my god, Quentin Tarantino directing a Superman movie.
Although now I want apple strudel because you mentioned Inglourious Bastards. God damn you.
Picture Superman, a Superman movie directed by Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah,
Honestly, I
and
think it'd be better than Zack Snyder. Like, part of me was scared, like thinking it'd be even bloodier, but Quentin
if it
Tarantino.
were, it would work because Quentin Tarantino is a geek, and so he'd understand the. My only problem would be if he tried to go the Kill Bill route, because of course Tarantino made Kill Bill. So my question is, does Tarantino think of Superman in the way that Bill does, or was he putting
Like,
a
one of his,
wrong-headed interpretation in the mouth of a character that was supposed to be the villain? That's the only question I have there.
I think he wrote it from the character's perspective. Honestly, that dialogue. So,
I'd hope so.
I mean, granted, the movie he's wanted to direct most, like as a comic book or superhero movie, is a Luke Cage film. Like, do it in the style of a blaxploitation movie.
Which just sounds genius.
Yeah.
And Kevin Feige, how in God's name have you not taken him up on this offer like 1,000 times already?
Because they're getting more into the weird stuff, and Luke Cage is very street level.
You know what? I will take that. If they actually deliver on the weird stuff, i.e. my stuff, then I will take that. That is a good enough reason for me.
You know
But
what?
that also means you have to actually deliver on that shit.
Yeah, honestly, I would love to see an Iron Fist movie, possibly directed. Well, I don't know, maybe not Quentin Tarantino, but
Honestly, him doing a buddy cop movie with Iron Fist and Power Man would be amazing.
well, okay. Here's, I'll pitch my idea for an Iron Fist movie for the MCU later. When we're not doing this, like we gotta at least get to 10 minutes.
Hmm.
All right, shall we?
We shall.
Banana.
My biggest pet peeve is when people think that Superman, a hero who exists on this planet because of the complete destruction of his people, would instantly turn into a dictator because Lois Lane is murdered. What a reductive idea of what that character is. I mean, there's a reason that Homelander is an ex.
Thank you.
Yeah, no arguments for me on this one.
Like, I could understand. I mean, like, to be fair, in the Injustice storyline, it's the entirety of Metropolis, right? So not only Lois,
but also presumably Jimmy Olsen and everyone who's
everyone on the planet, all the people in Metropolis that Superman has helped, possibly like heroes like Steel, John Henry Irons, who basically got a second chance at life because Superman saved him and decided to become a hero and wore the symbol of the House of El in honor of Superman, the man who saved his life and gave him a second chance. Imagine all the people that Superman has saved over the years in Metropolis gone in an instant in a nuclear fire because of the Joker.
Yeah, that'll do.
If it was written right, it could have worked, but it's just
yet another case of he has all this power, but he doesn't use it in the way a normal person would use it. So that means he's stupid and silly and dumb.
Again, it would have made more sense if Batman was the antagonist.
Yeah, all you'd need to do would be to switch it from
Metropolis to Gotham.
Yeah.
I'm not the first one who thought of this. There was a YouTuber by the name of The Fourth Snake who did kind of a rewrite version of Injustice where he pitched this idea of Batman being the villain.
Yeah, if all of Gotham went up in nuclear smoke because of the Joker, that comic would have to be freaking X-rated.
Right.
Like Watchmen would look like a freaking Silver Age story in comparison.
Right. Yeah, it's so. Again, I don't mind evil Superman stories if at least they take an interesting route with it, but they never do. It's just always, again, someone given these godlike powers. They just fucking.
They immediately go corrupt because it's not that power reveals the inherent nature of a person. It's the power itself, and having it will make someone go nuts somehow.
That's that besides that active, is it typically a philosophical point?
I mean, it's an attempt at one. It's not very well made, and this is another
No, the
point
whole
about
the,
this whole
the whole thing.
aggrandizing of nihilism as the mature position thing. I hate. Like, no, just because the things that most people care about are bullshit doesn't mean there's nothing worth caring about,
Yeah.
or that the notion of like
Uh,
giving a damn about something is bad
What's funny
or
is
stupid.
there's actually I was recently watching some clips from the movie Seven.
Great movie.
It is. What's weird is like you can make an active argument that it is for most of it inherently cynical and possibly nihilistic from the point of view of like John Doe or Detective Mills, Brad Pitt's character.
Hmm.
But in the end, with like Detective Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman, he says the quote from Ernest Hemingway, which is, "The world is a beautiful place and is worth fighting for." I agree with the second part. Where because of the events of the movie, from the point of view of Somerset, who was going to retire because he was sick of just the downtrodden,
The the brokenness of the world.
yeah. So he was going to retire, like he was kind of just beaten at that point. But because of John Doe and like the stuff that had happened, like through his master plan to prove that the world is shit, like legitimately shit. And
Or to use another more comic booky example, the Joker speech in The Dark Knight about these civilized people, when the chips are down, they'll eat each other. I'll show you.
also, he's proven wrong in that movie as well. With
Although,
the boat scene.
I think the Joker has more of at the very least, a more well thought out point than John Doe does.
Fair enough. That's fair.
Then again, John Doe is a bit nuts because of all the
religious.
the super fundamentalist evangelical bullshit.
There actually is a video, and I'll try and find it and send it to you, where they break down the psychology of John Doe. It's actually very interesting.
I've seen a couple of videos that have done that.
I think it's
one
from
in particular. Oh, okay, yeah, it's from Analyzing Evil.
Yeah,
I've seen that one.
Yeah, it's a good one. Like
I keep recommending for him to do Mr. Glass, but he hasn't done Mr. Glass yet. I want him to do Mr. Glass.
Yeah, but point being is that throughout most of the movie, it is very cynical. It's very downtrodden. It's very like, again, you can make the argument nihilistic, I suppose. And from the point of view of John Doe and Detective Mills, especially Detective Mills at the end, it can be. But with Somerset, he has, I wouldn't say faith restored, but more so a will to fight to have people's faith restored to make the world better. Kinda. That's at least how I interpreted it.
Mm-hmm.
But that could just be me because I'm the optimist and stuff, and I look for that kind of thing.
No, never stop being you.
Right, but I again, like we're just having a discussion here, stemming from this from her.
Because she there is absolutely nothing wrong with what she just said.
Yeah, I'm just curious on where she's going to go with it.
I'm honestly a little bit flabbergasted that someone who writes for the Mary Fricking Sue said that.
Yeah. Again, you can make evil superhero stories, like superheroes that go bad, but at least be creative about it.
Or you can create heroes that blur the line, or that are more less strict in their moral structure.
Right.
or that just don't care about morality, like for example, L and Light Yagami from Death Note. Neither of those characters is particularly moral, but they are very, very, very heavily philosophical.
I mean, you can oh, actually, no, you're right. Not moral, but at least L is.
That's the great thing about the first like 25 episodes of Death Note. The ending of Death Note is terrible, but that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. But the great thing about Death Note is, while they both might do what they do under the pretext of justice and morality, most of the morality, quote unquote, in Death Note is logic. Again, right up until after L dies, and then the universe suddenly grows a conscience for some reason. And so what it becomes is not a who is the most moral person discussion. It's who is the most logical and capable of the two. It's a game of chess or cat and mouse, where unfortunately human lives get taken as pieces.
Right. I do remember someone had said, like, in a video, I say I was watching a Death Note. I don't remember what it was called or anything, but they had made an argument, or at least they had stated something, that L was growing more of a, while Light Yagami was losing his humanity as he was becoming more
L
pure.
was becoming more human as the series went on, and it was ultimately his downfall.
Yeah. Take that way how you will. Maybe humanity is a weakness or something. I personally don't agree with that.
No, I think it's just a matter of these kind of games are not conducive to pausing for the sake of personal growth. And I think a lot of Light's fall from grace too is more about the corruptive powers of the Death Note more so than his own evil.
Yeah, a part of me's kind of thinking what would happen if I had a Death Note, because, like, as you say, I'm kind of very strict with my moral code and stuff. Well, not strict, but I at least have a strong sense of moral code. So
You freaking quasi Captain America motherfucker.
Yeah. So a part of me is just kind of worried that it would corrupt me in a sense.
So just relinquish ownership of it and then give it to me.
No. I'm sorry, man, but I do not trust you with a Death Note. I know you would never use it on me, but I could not in good conscience allow that.
I mean, you're probably, once again, being as you're the one with the moral compass, and I'm the Machiavellian bastard what thinks everything boils down to reason and logic. You're probably not wrong.
Also, Dracula's horde stuff, so.
But that being said, I wouldn't do it in the way Light does it, because Light was really kind of stupid if you sit and think about it for 5 minutes, and I have, because Death Note is my favorite anime.
Also, basically the entire internet could figure out who you are if you did that shit. Like, there's actually a video I watched talking about it.
And honestly, my biggest thing with the Death Note is it possible to kill ideas using the Death Note? Because
you want to get rid of, like, feminism and SJWism and stuff like that?
yeah, I wouldn't really kill people. I would just sort of, and I wouldn't even like mind control people or anything. The way, because I've thought about this. If the Death Note can kill anything, and it just needs to know how to kill something, like in the case of the Shinigami, the reason Light couldn't write Ryuk's name down is because he didn't know how to kill a Shinigami at the time. If the Death Note can literally kill anything, then as far as I can tell, the way to kill an idea without engaging in like mind control is just a mass epiphany. Like if everyone who believes in a bad idea suddenly gets a flash of insight as to why that idea is stupid, and stops believing it because they realize why that idea is stupid.
That probably just opens up to more stupidity down the line.
Well, true, but if all I'm killing is bad ideas and no human dies, or no living entity dies as a result of my use of the Death Note, then I don't.
We'd probably be out of a job then, right?
I know, but I mean, if everyone in the world had good ideas and acted on those good ideas, then we probably we probably have a much easier time doing anything, because the world would be a better place. Because if you kill all the bad ideas without killing the people that believe them, then boom.
Right. Okay. This was a weird tangent. Shall we?
Yes.
Banana.
Of Superman and Captain America, it is because people already think that those characters, along with fellow Blue Boy Scout Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, are mindless slaves to the status quo, even though there are plenty of comics that tell us otherwise.
And see, this is where I have to disagree with her a little bit. The reason why people like Homelander work, or why they should work, is because people know that Superman isn't like that. In fact, that was most of the backlash for Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, because when Zack Snyder did what he always does and tries to apply a Randian objectivism lens to everything, which I don't begrudge him, it's his philosophy, even if what I begrudge him is that he's not particularly good at it, but that's not really material to this conversation. But when people saw that he was trying to Randian objectivism Superman, they balked, because that doesn't work with the character as he is supposed to be. In the same way that when the Batman that showed up in Batman v Superman was the old, grizzled, cynical, kill everything Batman that actually used guns and so forth, a lot of people had issues with that, although it wasn't quite as loud, because after the fuck up that was Man of Steel, everyone was like, okay, so this is what we're doing now. But a lot of people who were more hardcore Batman fans had a bit of an issue with Batfleck being the basically Dark Knight Returns Batman instead of a more straightforward Batman. So in a lot of ways, the reason why Homelander and Omni-Man work is because on some level people understand that that's not who Superman is, so it's interesting to see a what if Superman is like that. However, I will agree that there are a lot of people, a lot of very, very stupid people, and I think this is partly your point, that do believe that Superman and Batman and all the rest are already authoritarian figures like that.
I do.
Mostly because of people like Eric Kripke saying things like that. And quite frankly, I would be very happy indeed if they stopped saying shit like that, because it is not so and makes no philosophical sense.
Right. I do have something to add. I mean, again, going back to like the idea of like Batman being the actual antagonist of injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you and I had a conversation prior to stream, briefly, of like Batman kind of has more like, again, I'm not saying this is as objective. It's just from my knowledge of Batman, like actual Batman from like comics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is he's actually more keen to authoritarianism, more so than Superman.
Yeah, because he's paranoid.
Yeah, he's paranoid. I don't know if cynical is
bitter.
Yeah, bitter.
And here's the other thing, and people don't often bring this up, but I think it's important to bring it up here. Because Batman has no powers, quote unquote, and because he has had to work for everything he has, that makes him more vulnerable than all the other superpowered beings in the DC universe. So that probably also makes him more prone to authoritarianism, because in a lot of cases, authoritarianism comes from weakness and the need for the world to stay exactly how I want it at all times. The need to nail everything into place and to force people to comply, because otherwise I might have to deal with something that I can't handle. Whereas with Superman, because he basically knows that no matter what he faces, he is as powerful or more powerful than it. He does, to some extent, and again, we can debate how much this actually impacts him or not, or how much his lack of powers impact Batman. But there is an argument to be made for the fact that Batman has no powers is part of the reason why he is so prone to paranoia and contingencies on top of contingencies, because he wants to control as many things as he can control, because he knows what it's like to not have control. Whereas Superman knows what it's like to always be in control and to always need to be in control. Therefore, he never really develops authoritarian tendencies, because he's never known that kind of fear, that kind of existential dread of, oh my god, the world is a cruel, cynical place, and I need to adapt to survive in it.
Also, to kind of get a little less sophisticated, as Dawn is often so. Just like think about it logically, that with the contingencies he has in place, like I'm sure he has, that dude has like thousands, I think, with like for every hero, including his own friends and family.
Yeah.
If he ever went fucking dark or evil, he's
again that comic would make Watchmen look like a Silver Age comic.
Right. He is so. I think. Yeah, he's so fucking. He would be one of the most terrifying things ever.
Emperor Batman is far scarier to me than Emperor Joker, if I'm entirely honest.
Oh, like you have the powers of like Dr. Manhattan or Batman.
Mixius Pitlink in the comic, but yeah.
I was thinking the Brave and the Bold.
Yeah, in Brave and the Bold, they changed it to Batmite because they already had introduced Batmite and they hadn't introduced Mixius yet.
Yeah. Granted, in that show, it was more of a cameo, but whatever.
Yeah, but omnipotent Batman scares me significantly more than omnipotent Joker, because say what you will about Joker, he at least allows for people to be free in some sense, because he enjoys the chaos that can occur because people are free.
Yeah, he just. I mean, they're free in the fact that they can run around and try to hide, screaming for their lives.
Yeah, a psychotic clown he may be, but a clown he is nonetheless. Whereas Batman, with his grizzled face and his stone baked self seriousness all the time, that gets scary very, very quickly, because
Right.
Joker probably would let people do things just out of the lulz half the time, even if he was extremely sadistic about it. But Batman,
what's funny is there is an Injustice comic that like Batman got hit with an hallucinogen drug, where basically he stopped all the bad shit from happening. Like he stopped the nuke. He stopped Joker from activating the nuke and stopped Superman from killing Lois Lane by being convinced that it was Doomsday via amplified scarecrow fear toxin. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Where like he sees this vision of like he kills Joker, like he snaps Joker's neck to protect because Joker wants to go back to try again with Superman, and Superman has a kid come in with his wife Lois and stuff,
and to save both his friend and the world all that pain.
Yeah, he kills Joker, and like he turns himself in. He reveals his identity to everyone, and like he allows himself to get arrested and stuff. And it's interesting. And again, like, how is it that there are interesting concepts that are more interesting than what we actually fucking got?
Because people don't know or care or know that they should care.
Yeah. Anyway.
And they view everything as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. For me, at least on some level, a lot of things come back to that.
Yeah, and it makes me sad and angry at the same time.
Well, I mean, yes, but time for me to be the optimistic one. In a world where everything is broken, you get to be the one to fix it.
Yeah. Shall we?
Yeah.
Jinx.
This happens because when these characters get adapted, they are not allowed to be complicated. I ultimately think that Superman as a threat was best handled in Superman the Animated Series, part of the DCAU. He's taken over by Darkseid and is forced to be part of conquering the Earth, only to be ultimately enslaved by Lois Lane. Shout out to her. His corruption, while not his fault, makes everyone's butthole clench. And this carries on to Justice League and Justice League Unlimited.
Still one of the best depictions of, like, the DCAU is still one of the bestest depictions.
Yeah, still gold standard. Gold standard for how you adapt comics correctly. Yep.
Also, I mean, it's not an evil Superman, but it's an interesting story. Like, it's an Elseworlds, Justice League Gods and Monsters, which is created by Bruce Timm and I believe Paul Dini as well.
Back when they were still on speaking terms, anyway.
Really, what happened?
I think one of them, they got into some kind of argument, and that's why the reboot of the DC animated multiverse happened, because they didn't want to work together anymore.
Huh. That sucks. But yeah, no, I got nothing to say here. I mean, like, that honestly is one of the best depictions of.
Yeah, although you can say that for almost every character who shows up in those, like
of an evil Superman.
Yeah.
One of the better ones, at least. Like.
Yeah, every character in that series though is depicted as their best, like adapted in their best way possible.
Yeah. Shall we?
Banana.
Banana.
And it ultimately leads to the creation of Cadmus, the cloning of Supergirl, and a lot of other government versus the Justice League issues. It's always framed with a level of understanding that the average person should be threatened by all the power that the Justice League has. They are a totally independent body with no oversight, and Green Arrow is always playing the everyman, being like, well, you know, who's gonna gatekeep the gatekeepers?
To be fair, the average person doesn't really figure in the Cadmus storyline. Not saying they can't, but
I mean,
it's mostly the U.S. government, and particularly the shadowy secret parts of the U.S. government that get their buttholes clenched, as you put it.
I mean, they're not without fault. I mean, like they're not wrong, but also
the closest thing to the everyman taking issue with the Justice League that comes is my boy the Question being the smartest person in the room and figuring out.
He's also a conspiracy.
Yeah, he's he's a nut, and yet another case of honestly one of the best cases of Randian objectivism done right in a character that I've seen. And even he is shown to be wrong in several key cases. Not saying therefore that unaccountable bodies like the Justice League should exist or anything. I'm just saying your summary makes it seem like the average person should be A, either aligned with the government, or B, afraid of the Justice League. And we don't, and I'm not saying they couldn't have gone that route, but they didn't really see the average person's reaction to the Justice League. They saw the shadowy secret government organization, partially funded by Luthor, incidentally, reaction to Superman. Unless you want to say that Amanda Waller is an everyman person, and at which point I would just laugh, because Amanda Waller is a badass par excellence, but she ain't no everyman, my darling.
It's weird that they made her like very much like an action movie star in like the New 52. I mean, like I'm not opposed to it. It's just it's weird. Like they turned her in like it looked like Halle Berry could play that character.
I miss old school CH Pounder Agent Waller.
I mean, it's a change I'd be interested in seeing adapted, but I also like Viola Davis as Amanda Waller.
Yeah, I think she works. Honestly, though, at this point, CH Pounder has gotten old enough that you could just have her play Amanda Waller in live action. Because honestly, and this is funny, I'm not sure if they based Amanda Waller's aesthetic on the actress playing her or not, but they look very similar, or they could look very similar.
Amanda Waller, I think, existed long before her introduction into the series.
I believe so. So that would but yeah, and CH Pounder has done live action roles before. So yeah, why didn't anyone think to just cast CH Pounder again?
I don't know. Because people don't think like that.
Yeah, and they didn't know enough about the fanboy or the fandom to know that would be a good idea.
I still think Viola Davis is a pretty good choice. It's just
she is. I'm not bagging on Viola Davis. I just hope that James Gunn gives her more material to work with, because Amanda Waller is actually one of my favorite minor characters in the entire DC universe. If I'm entirely honest.
Shall we?
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Banana.
Right, no, we were going on a tangent also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Banana.
Must also consider the possibility that Cadmus is right to be afraid of us.
What?
And there is strong evidence of Cadmus having legitimate connections to the government.
Maybe to some rogue black ops group. The real government wouldn't get involved in anything like this.
Hey, I'm the only guy in the room who doesn't have superpowers, and let me tell you, you guys scare me. But
All right. Well, I stand corrected. I guess they did give some kind of everyman approach here.
I mean, technically, Wally is a billionaire, so. But then again, his backstory could equate him to an everyman.
Yeah, I'm more than willing just to concede the point for the sake of this. But
I was just like, I feel like the context also has to be stated as well.
Mm-hmm. It is worth noting that no one who can join the Justice League is really in it. Honest to goodness, everyman. Because
I mean, you're a superhero. There's no way you're an everyman.
That sort of by definition excludes you from the every person club.
I mean, maybe Stargirl and Stripe, because it's just like a teenage girl, like an average teenage girl, and a stepfather.
And this show didn't exist long enough to introduce Jaime, because I don't believe Jaime even existed in the comics yet. But Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle would be another good example of an actual everyman.
Also,
in this context.
Well, I don't know. Would Billy, Shazam? I mean, Shazam was already out of the Justice League by this time, so.
I mean, Billy Batson, maybe you could argue, but he's a little bit sheltered in the fact that he's a kid.
that's
Captain Marvel, I would say no, because he's gifted with the wisdom of Solomon, and therefore that kind of changes the way his mind works.
okay.
And
Again,
see, that's another. I wish someone would address that at some point, because they hand wave away that he has the wisdom of Solomon, and yet like that's kind of a big deal for a kid, age 12 or whatever, to all of a sudden basically know the secrets of the universe as taught by either the Archangel Gabriel or Raziel, depending on the lore, if we're really going with the wisdom of Solomon.
Questions for later. Shall we?
Banana.
Banana.
If you do decide to go marching down there, taking care of whoever you think is guilty, who could stop you? Me?
So you want the government to have a bunch of superhuman weapons just to keep us in check?
No. I don't know. Yeah. Look, I'm an old lefty. The government must do for people what people can't do for themselves.
It's
Okay.
weird. You know what's weird? Like, people always say like superhero stories are political, but here's the thing. This makes it interesting. It's not just propaganda.
Yeah, it's not we already have all the answers. It's here is the situation as objectively and well-rounded as we can present it, and here are some characters with individual identities and personalities. What can have this argument?
But also, like, I'm on the fence with the whole discussion. Like, I understand, and like, I would kind of agree that you would need a contingency in case there were a rogue unit of the Justice League.
And that being said, I do not trust the government to
No,
do
I
such
feel
a
like
thing.
there has to be a third party, like a very non-partial, unbiased third party.
You basically need the more cosmic and mystical members of the Justice League to keep an eye on all the street level ones. Which honestly, especially in this universe, and not just because I'm me, but as we see in the episode The Return, I would hazard a guess the person you'd want to be doing that job would be Dr. Fate.
Yeah.
However, there is another option here in this particular universe, and that's Amazo. Amazo could act as the counter to the Justice League without being a tyrant or anything. Simply because dude basically just fucked off into the universe and became Dr. Manhattan through study.
Yep.
Which is I really miss Amazo, and I'm sad they never brought him back, because that would be interesting. Like after the resurrection of Solomon Grundy episode, they never brought him back. He fucked off into the ether to try and figure out chaos magic, and how to counter it. And honestly, my money was on they were gonna adapt the Day of Vengeance, but instead of making it the Spectre, they were gonna make it Amazo and make him go after all the magic users, which would have been really interesting. Would have hated it because I hate when magic users fucking die, but
Actually, it would have been interesting if they turned Amazo into the Spectre. I mean, I realize the Spectre is its own character and is an interesting character in its own right, but
I don't think that's entirely necessary. I think all you'd really need is somebody on the general power scale and type of the Spectre. You wouldn't need the Spectre himself. Like, you could have easily done that storyline with the Phantom Stranger. It's just that the Spectre is known to be the spirit of vengeance and is known for going more insane more often. So, but in the case of this universe with Amazo, I mean, he's trying to understand the fundamental forces of chaos within the context of magic. So, if anything was going to drive a robot mind or a former robot mind insane, I would imagine it would be understanding spiritual forces at all, but B, understanding the literal forces of spirituality that are chaos itself.
Right. Shall we?
Banana.
The people sure can't protect themselves from the likes of us.
We're not talking about the government. We're talking about a shadow cabinet that's taken it upon themselves to eliminate us. They came after us, we have to hit them back hard.
Granny Flash always used to say the trouble with an eye for an eye is that everybody ends up blind.
And as a kid, I ate that shit up because it makes sense. Fuck authority figures. They don't. We don't.
I think you took the wrong lesson from that.
I mean, given the choice between the Justice League and Cadmus, I'm going with the Justice League. But
I equate. I'm sorry. It's just like I don't know.
I find it weird that she kind of conflates the government with the
authority figures.
Yeah, it's a little weird. Not saying there's no reason to do that. It's just weird.
It's
anyway. Banana.
Yeah. 1 sec. Okay. Yep. Banana.
Don't trust them. Don't trust the police. Yet, when I rewatch it as an adult, I also see something very specific. They don't actually do anything. The superheroes, that is. Superman ultimately is not a fascist. He's not even really a cop. Superman does not shoot unarmed black kids. Superman isn't drone striking people in other countries.
There was a lot wrong in there, and also a lot.
I don't even. This is entirely immaterial to the conversation, but most of the fervor around things like BLM is unnecessary and unjustified. Let's not even get into the fact that most police officers don't actually do what, that not all cops are bastards. Yes, there are some cops that are sociopaths because sociopaths are drawn to positions of authority.
Yeah.
And that is documented too, but
again, case by case scenario, judge an individual as an individual and not as a group.
Yeah, and but again, the fact that they don't do anything is kind of the point, because the argument is not over what they might do. The argument is what do they have the potential to do. Also, even Amanda Waller points this out when she says, "I had some guys in R&D run some computer simulations, and to figure out what we could do if every member of the Justice League went rogue, and essentially the answer was we could do basically nothing, but that was before Cadmus. The way she puts it, I think, is every single scenario you beat us, but that was before Cadmus. So yeah, the fact that they didn't do anything to warrant this kind of suspicion is part of the interesting philosophy of it all, because it doesn't matter if a being with the powers of any one of the members of the Justice League existed and got it in their heads to go all black hat. By the time you're considering that they have the potential to do this, it's too late. By the time you're waiting for them to actually do something like that, it's too late, because especially if there's a bunch of them, because you might on a good day be able to take out Superman, but then you've got Wonder Woman, the Flash, Captain Atom, and on and on and on the list goes. And the further you go down the line, the more of those characters you have to deal with. So I can understand the cold governmental logic of, we know they haven't done anything, we know they're not authoritarian in general, but A, they have all the power in the universe effectively, and then some in some cases. B, they easily could do all this untoward crap, and C, by the time we wait for them to actually do something, it's effectively too late to do anything about it, unless we prepare ahead of time, which is the logic of Cadmus. Now, granted, in general, they were being overly paranoid, and in general, the correct answer was just let them be, and they'll be fine. But having those contingencies, I don't think, was the problem. It's they decided to develop those contingencies in secret without ever asking anybody. Like, I'm sure if the government came to Superman or came to the original Seven and called a meeting and was like, guys, like, not to worry you or anything, but we saw what happened with the Justice Lords in the alternate universe, and we're kind of worried. So let's we're going to try and make contingencies. And what's more, quite a few members of the League would probably help, especially Batman, because I'm sure he would be entirely down with having extra technology to use for his contingency plans and whatnot. And we know that him and Amanda Waller can work well together because we saw it in like Batman Beyond and stuff. So yeah, the problem isn't the making of Cadmus. It was the shady and unaccountable way they went about doing it. Going on?
I don't know. Can we call it here?
For now. Yeah. When do you want to next touch on this?
Maybe when a week is not like.
When we're running dry on stuff?
Yeah. Hopefully, maybe the next week or something.
Well, I mean, over the course of the last week, we got like 3 weeks worth of material, so I don't think we'll be hurting for quite a while.
Fair enough. So yeah, folks, we're gonna call it there for tonight. We may probably do another show on Saturday. Well, maybe Friday. Possibly. Well, we'll let you know.
But yeah, we're planning on possibly doing a second show this week because while our back was turned, everything happened. Between the Blizzard harassment story and its follow-up, and the Disney ScarJo suit, that's honestly a stream in and of itself.
Right. So yeah.
Not to mention the backlash of the He-Man thing and all of the trailers that have come out in the past week. So yeah, we're going to be
we'll hash it out more later this week. So with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, auf Wiedersehen, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
fuck off.